The Innkeeper by Life Sketcher. Chapter 381 Stupid. Regal embrace was a cultivation technique with the sole purpose of building the strongest defense possible. Every aspect, every facet of it was geared towards that one goal. As such, it was fundamentally impossible to cultivate it and have an unstable foundation due to rapid growth. This was because the cultivation level would simply not grow if it was forced in such a manner. But, in the situation where the cultivation level did grow, time had little to do with it. For the cultivation technique to progress, the relevant aspect of it that each specific cultivation realm required had to be fulfilled. For the foundation realm, cultivation would not progress by pumping the body full of endless energy, but by slowly and steadily building the foundation for cultivation within the body. In Lex's case, a steady foundation had to be built not only for his spirit, but his body and soul as well. It had to be exactly perfect according to the requirements of the cultivation technique, and the built foundation, while taking only a single form, was actually elevating all three. This was because Lex's body, soul, and spirit had all merged into one entity. So then, the fact that the energy released by the blue crystal was able to flawlessly raise Lex's cultivation level to the peak of the foundation realm was already an unbelievable testament to the absolute purity, vitality, and gentleness of the energy itself. This was because Lex never actually used his cultivation technique, or rather he did not get a chance to, before the energy automatically started merging with his body so flawlessly it raised his cultivation level. In fact, the moment Lex reached the peak of the foundation realm, he felt the information to enter the golden core realm reveal itself to him, but he purposefully chose not to enter the realm at that moment. This was because, while his physical cultivation had built up its foundation, his professor heavily emphasized the need for some kind of achievement to create a mental foundation for him. The achievement was completely up to him to decide, so he could have gone with his fight with the murderer, or his upgrade on the system. But he had already decided that he would use arrays as the base for his achievement. So while the use of many small arrays joining to form large arrays quickly was ingenious, he was not satisfied with his application of it. He felt like he could do better. As a result, this energy found other channels to divert itself. It was a shame that Lex's pride got the better of him, or else he may have potentially entered the nascent realm today, or even higher. With his foundation built, the energy sought to heal his body. But how could he have the perfect defense if his body was full of flaws? A hidden aspect of regal embrace came into play here, which was that while he could heal, he would eventually heal perfectly. Only inherent flaws already existing in his body would escape the healing powers of regal embrace. So then where should it go, for it could not physically strengthen Lex's body any further? It found a sieve within Lex's soul, and poured itself in, bombarding the system with endless energy. One may wonder, why would so much energy travel towards the system, and not the lotus which had requested the energy to begin with? The answer was simple. The energy that was flooding Lex's body was simply the small leftovers that managed to escape the lotus control. The lotus itself was going mad from excitement with the energy it was absorbing, but that was hidden for now. Aegis and Joseph were struck dumb because while the energy released from the crystal was being described as gentle and nourishing in Lex's situation, it was mostly because it was less than 1% of the energy the crystal contained. Were the lotus not absorbing the rest of it, Lex's body would literally have exploded before the system even got a chance to absorb the excess energy. Blue light was escaping from Lex's body, at first only from his fingernails, ears, and nose. But eventually the brightness increased, and even his skin began to glow. His body started levitating until it was 3 feet in the air, and a violent, oppressive force began to form around his body that gave both the immortals chills. The force was not generated because of Lex, but the tattoo on his back. Immortal though they may be, how could they compare to a seed that would give birth to a 5-star world? More importantly, its status as a 5-star world was only the lowest guaranteed achievement, and did not account for its upper limit. Most importantly, whatever world it would form would already have an already awakened consciousness. Lex was completely unaware of all of this, as he had entered some kind of trance as the energy transferred from his body to the system. In a few seconds, it reached 500%, and then while it began to slow down, when his body returned to the ground a few minutes later, he had 1,200% energy. That was to say, the less than 1% energy that the lotus was unable to control actually provided Lex with enough energy to travel from one realm to another 11 times. This was a level of energy even Earth immortals could not wield. No wonder the two immortals who were watching this were thoroughly startled. When Lex woke up from the trance, he heard a few system notifications, but he didn't want to delve into them in public. He smiled as he enjoyed the warm, fuzzy feeling enveloping his body and looked towards Joseph and said, "Thanks, that was actually quite fun. Shall we head back now, or do you have more?" "Let's head back," he said, barely able to keep his voice steady. The worst part of all of this, for him at least, was that Lex was only showing his cultivation as peak foundation realm after that. How stupid did he think they were? Chapter 382 Home. "You said you've kept a small piece to lure out Zagan?" Lex asked casually as they returned the formation that would take them out of here. "Indeed," replied Aegis, as he gulped nervously. "It's much, much smaller than the one you took, but it should be more than enough to attract Zagan." "Not bad. What's this crystal called?" he asked, still enjoying the warm fuzzy feeling that had enveloped his body. "We're not sure if it has another name, as there's been no record of it before." Joseph, who found the crystal, called it blue crystal essence. It is filled with an extremely potent destructive energy that is normally used to power formations. Aegis gave him a look from the side of his eye but said nothing more. Lex on the other hand was quite confused by the destructive description, but how could he be blamed for considering it gentle when he only had less than 1% of the energy in his body? "I've spent many years studying it, trying to figure out how it was formed," said Joseph, who politely included himself in the conversation. He suddenly felt it was very important to maintain good relations with Lex. "I was unable to figure out how it was actually formed, but I did learn how it definitely wasn't formed." The formation of the blue crystal essence was in no way familiar to that of spirit stones, and there was no energy accumulation process in the vicinity. In fact, there are no spirit stone mines anywhere nearby this area. "Do you have any more in the area? I'd be willing to trade for it. Speaking of which, I've managed to get my hands on many of the items you put down on your list for me. You can drop by whenever you want to check them out." "I'll make sure to visit soon," Joseph replied, looking away. He knew for a fact that no unknown people had come in or gone out of the tavern these past few days, so how did he get his hands on the required material? Not to mention, he got it so quickly. Once Lex returned to the tavern safely, he told Aegis to stick by as he would give him the platinum key soon. Aegis wanted to take Fenrir out hunting again today, as the pup had shown great promise during their last venture out, but Lex told him next time. Since it was very likely he was about to return to the inn, Fenrir would be returning with him. Once alone, Lex did not immediately check his system. His body was still warm, and while he felt great after such a massive increase in strength, he felt slightly disoriented. His brain was not yet used to controlling his new strength and was causing him problems. Not bothering with anything, Lex jumped directly into bed and took a nap. Though what he assumed was a nap lasted 2 whole days. A part of his rest was because of his brain once again getting used to a new, more powerful body, but also because of the tattoo on his back. It had grown bigger, slightly, and more petals had appeared in each layer. Previously, the petals had been arranged in 3 layers, with 5 petals in each layer. Now, instead, there were 6 in each layer. Such a change did not seem drastic, but that was only from a visual point of view. The lotus had grown much stronger and gained immense potential, but as a result, had also increased the strength of its body with Lex's body. When Lex finally woke up, completely unaware of the amount of time that had passed, he stretched like a cat before lazily checking the system from right inside his bed. New notification, 100% progress reached, host can return to the inn at any time. New notification, 100% energy surpassed, channeling excess energy into dormant system functions. New notification, 1100% excess energy being transferred, new building/features unlocked. New features. New status panel for monitoring in unlocked. New status panel for workers unlocked. New status panel for tracking multiple events unlocked. New status panel for locating quest potentials unlocked. New building, Innkeeper's office building unlocked. Innkeeper's office building. A small building where the Innkeeper may see guests who wish to meet. Lex raised an eyebrow, caught by surprise that he had actually surpassed the energy requirements. Moreover, while the description for his new unlocked feature seemed simple, he doubted that was the case. But all of that could wait. It was time to go home. Lex immediately selected to return to the inn, and felt a familiar sensation take hold of him. The teleportation was not as quick as he was used to from the inn, but for some strange reason he lost track of time while teleporting. He only knew it wasn't quick. But the moment it disappeared, Lex, who had his eyes closed, could immediately tell that he had returned. It was in the freshness of the air, the smell carried on the breeze, the gentle sunlight on his skin. A smile formed on his face as he took in a deep breath and, after holding it in for a moment, let it all out with a satisfied sigh. When he opened his eyes, a projection of Mary was standing there waiting for him. The smile on her face was no less than his. Truth be told, she was extremely nervous the entire time Lex was gone. "Welcome back, Innkeeper," she said simply. "It's good to be back," he said with a grin. "It's excellent that you're in a bright mood," she continued, "because someone showed an interest in the jobs put up by Ragnar, but he said he wanted to meet with the Innkeeper before he accepts the tasks. I hope you're ready to convince him to take up the tasks, because, depending on how this goes, you could be on the verge of becoming a trillionaire." Chapter 383 Anachronistic Ignition. Lex was not ready, nor was he expecting to get right to work the absolute minute he arrived at the inn. But the incentive to become a trillionaire was exceptional. Not that he was in need of a great deal of money at the moment, but he knew that he would be in a state of expansion for the foreseeable future. Not only would the expansion cost a lot of money, buying anything for a higher cultivation level always cost more money. He had merely bought a drink that could affect an immortal and the price had gone in the millions. Were he to buy a building or service, the price may even go in the hundreds of millions. Getting too comfortable would be a mistake. With that mindset, he put away all thoughts of going out for a stroll and decided to get right into the thick of things. Before anything, however, he looked at the Innkeeper's office building. While the building existed as a service, the shape and design were completely up to him. If he had extensive time he would have assigned the task to the planning commission, but since he did not, he took matters into his own hands. He thought for a minute about the kind of office someone of the Innkeeper's status should have. He could go overly grand, but to Lex it seemed slightly desperate to prove the status of his position, or just plain gaudy, which he did not like. He could go for extremely simple and basic, but he felt like the whole transcended the need for worldly possessions and find the truth in simplicity. It was an exhausted and overused spiel. In the end, he just decided to keep it as he liked. His mind, now faster than ever before due to the boost provided by his elevated cultivation, recalled every office he ever liked and tried to find a commonality. He'd visited a few penthouse offices as well when he worked back in New York, not to mention his own regular offices, so he had some ammunition for his thoughts. Once he figured out what he liked, he began picking out a position. On a small plateau near the Midnight Manor, a rectangular building appeared. There was a torch-lit, pebbled path leading up to it, with open gardens on each side. There was not much in the building, since it only served as his office. The entrance led to a large hall with marble flooring and granite walls, with a reception desk at the far end. There was a waiting room that could be entered from on the right, but the entrance to Lex's office was in the corner behind the reception desk. Unlike the entrance hall, the floor of which was gray, Lex's office floor was black marble. But it was not plain black, as streaks of gold flowed through the midnight black, like water flowing down into the dirt. On the left and right side of the office were ceiling-high bookshelves, stacked with hardcover books that had no titles. There were a few sofas placed in the center of the room, amidst a few decorations and plants here and there. Opposite those sofas, towards the far wall, was a single desk with an office chair tucked neatly in. Speaking of the far wall, unlike the rest of the building, it was made entirely out of one-sided glass with an extensive view of the Midnight Manor, and the rest of the inn. Lex teleported into the building to see it for himself, and was immediately hit with an oppressive feeling. Lex remained unaffected, for what could truly affect him at the inn? But he felt the oppression nonetheless, and knew immediately that it radiated from the very walls of his office. Each and every step was daunting, but somehow the oppressive feeling was not exactly intimidating. Instead, it was a sort of reminder of who one was about to meet. As he walked, the sound of his footsteps echoed loudly in the empty hall, prompting him to stop immediately, a frown upon his face. He snapped once, and then continued to walk. The sound was no longer a loud and never-ending echo. Instead, each of his footsteps was incredibly light and respectful, yet not entirely gone. Not bothering to check out the waiting room, Lex headed right into his office. Unlike the entrance hall, there was no oppressive feeling here. Instead, the room wafted with a clean and refreshing scent that reinvigorated Lex as soon as he stepped in, despite the fact that he had just recently woken up and had been full of energy. Lex felt incredibly calm and peaceful in his office, as if he knew from deep within his heart that this was a safe space. He walked to his table and pulled out his seat and sat down. The moment he sat, he became even more in sync with the inn than when he wore the host attire. The host attire, which was currently in the shape of a three-piece suit, allowed Lex to fully control everything happening at the inn. It was a conduit between himself and the system, for he knew now that he was simply unable to even begin to process everything his system did, let alone control it directly. When he sat down in the chair, however, it was kicked up a notch. For example, while he could become aware of everything at the inn at any time, he would need to scan the inn, or look for someone in particular to know what was happening. Once in the chair, however, it was like a portion of his newly acquired mental strength was diverted towards always keeping in touch with the system. Every action taking place within the system was being ranked by a level of importance from 0 to 100. And at the back of his mind he knew the numbers for each action. As soon as a number appeared that was abnormally high, or even a minor anomaly for that matter, he would know immediately. Moreover, while previously he could perform generic scans, now he could look for something more specific. While this was not entirely new for him, since he was always able to directly ask Mary whenever he needed to know something, it was still a good feature. His attention turned towards a few items that had been placed on his desk. There was a journal, an ink pen, an inkwell, a letter opener and a card holder full of cards that only said Innkeeper below midnight written in bold letters. He was convinced that these things were not ordinary, but he decided that first he would deal with the matter of the person wanting to take Ragnar's requests before anything else. Yet even that required him to do two things before he addressed the matter. The first was the matter of having a receptionist. Lex could hire one of his workers randomly, but he wanted instead to have a dedicated receptionist, who would perhaps even be his assistant. Not to mention, it gave him an opportunity to use his new worker's status panel. While previously he could directly hire what the system called AI to create living workers who could take up jobs at the inn, leaving their skills and traits up to fate, he could now be so much more specific in his requirements. First of all, for gender, he chose male. As a bachelor, it would be inappropriate for him to have a female receptionist, mostly because it would trigger the memory of every corny TV show he had ever seen in his life. The trope of falling in love with your employee was too cliché for him to even joke about. He skipped over stuff like age, appearance, height, etc., and went directly to his skills, abilities, bloodline, and cultivation. Every amendment he made would drastically increase the price of his worker, but Lex had money to spare. Without hesitation, he picked anything that sounded even remotely helpful, from eidetic memory, perfect recollection, exceptional multitasking, strong mental calculation abilities, exceptional perception, excellent reflexes, the best possible health recovery, immense vitality, and so much more. He made sure the assistant had a strong sense for etiquette and morality. Unfortunately, he could not have the assistant created with an elevated cultivation system, as everyone would still start as a mortal, but he could choose the bloodline. Other than regalia bloom, which all his workers seemed to start with, he had two other options. The regalia bloom was of great assistance in manipulating energy, but it was not necessarily the best choice for his assistant, so he looked at the other two. The next one was called anachronistic ignition. When he read the description, Lex's jaw dropped, and for the first time he actually felt incredibly jealous. It was hard for him not to envy his workers, who were all born with such an amazing bloodline right from the start. But he controlled his emotions, for he knew he had advantages of his own, especially when regal embrace was unique in the whole universe. This next one though, it was just ridiculous. Chapter 384 Luther. The regalia bloom bloodline allowed the user to take control of all kinds of energy within a certain zone, with only physical strength and stamina as the determining factors for how much energy the user could manipulate. The energy could be used by channeling it into any weapon or item as the medium for energy transfer. Though there were a few limitations in price, such as the endless beautification of the bloodline holder, and the user's ability to transfer the energy fast enough, theoretically such a bloodline would make one knight invincible. If Lex had this bloodline, along with his incredible reflexes and abilities, he most likely wouldn't even get a chance to use that incredible defense of his. Just the fact that, as a chi training cultivator, Gerard was able to combat a nascent level cultivator should be a clear indicator for how powerful and deadly this bloodline was. Yet anachronistic ignition, while supposedly on the same level, seemed ridiculous to Lex. Unlike the regalia blood, which had an area effect, the anachronistic ignition was completely confined to the user's body. What it could do, though, was that it could completely displace any kind of effect, status, or feature acting on, or part of the body, to a later date. In simple terminology, it could manipulate time with the user's body as the medium for time displacement. The use could be from something small to anything incredibly massive. For example, if the user was fatigued, he could use his bloodline to displace the effects of the fatigue over the next several hours, days, or years, depending on the user's ability. Moreover, he could do so endlessly as long as the bloodline was not exhausted. But the beautiful part was that bloodline exhaustion, in itself, was an aspect of the body that could be displaced, making the use of the bloodline potentially endless. Of course, at a later time the user would still have to suffer the displaced effect, but the potency of the effects could also be determined at the time of use. For example, in the case of fatigue, only 5% of the original fatigue will affect the user, but the duration is extended to make up for it. These were the simple things being displaced. The more complicated things could be something like severe wounds, such as stabs, illness, burns, poisoning, organ damage, and even, if one were fast enough, death. But something as mundane as indefinitely delaying death, or instantly recovering from severe damage such as a stab wound through the heart, was no longer enough to startle Lex. What completely drove him overboard was the second effect of the bloodline, as so far only the anachronistic portion of it had been discussed. The way to completely and properly utilize anachronistic ignition was to take something the body was suffering from, and instead of sending it forward in time, completely ignite it and remove it from ever returning in the timeline. This part was not as easy as the first part, but if succeeded, and say the user took a lethal injury and ignited its occurrence on his body from ever returning, based on the event being ignited, the user would be filled with a massive burst of energy as a sort of reward from time itself. So, in essence, a skilled user of the bloodline could not only endlessly suffer lethal attacks only to erase them moments later. With each injury he erased, the user would not get weaker but stronger and more energetic. There was almost no drawback. Almost, because once the user activated this bloodline for the first time, they would suffer an unspeakably horrific curse. Their body would stop aging forever, making them essentially immortal. Oh, how burdensome it was to know you could never take another sick day from work ever again because your body is forever stuck in its peak, healthy state. Lex gulped and turned his attention to the last bloodline. He was almost afraid to read about it. Fortunately, its name was simple, and not as unique or intimidating as the last two. Moreover, unlike the previous two, its effects were not so multifaceted. It was simply called Death Counter. Its effects were that the user could hide a drop of blood anywhere and, once the user died, 24 hours later, the user would come back to life from that drop of blood, in perfect health and at the peak of his power. There was no distance or realm restriction to where the blood could be hidden, and in the case the drop was hidden behind some kind of barrier such as the one that secluded the inn, and 24 hours passed, the user would come back to life whenever the barrier had any disruption at all. It was not at all too fancy, and just made one essentially immortal, even beyond the previous bloodline. Lex needed a minute to stabilize his mood as he struggled with the thought that such insanely cool bloodlines existed, which his system could give his workers, but he himself was forever without any bloodline. After all, if he had a bloodline, it should have been activated by now, right? Regardless, Lex didn't waste any time and selected anachronistic ignition as his receptionist's bloodline, which raised the price to 350 million MP, but it would not change his mind. He didn't know why there was such a gap in price between Regalia Bloom and anachronistic ignition, since they were both impressive in their own right, but they were thoughts for later. Having made all his selections, Lex completed his purchase. A familiar gold light flashed in front of him, and from within the light stepped for a young man. His appearance seemed to be in his early 20s, and he was wearing the signature suit of the Midnight Inn. He could have been called handsome, were it not for the fact that he had an entirely too delicate frame. He was a petite man, as if he could be blown away by the wind, but his expression was stern and serious. Luther reporting for duty, sir. Occasionally missing content, please report errors in time. Chapter 385 Lord. Luther, you will be my receptionist, said Lex with a smile. Yours will be a heavy responsibility, so I hope you will be up to the task. I do not expect to be seeing a lot of guests too frequently, so you will have a lot of time on your hands. I hope you use that tie wisely and raise your cultivation level as soon as possible. It would be slightly embarrassing if my own receptionist has too low a cultivation level. As you wish, Luther said with a bow, his expression forever unchanging. I am expecting a guest soon, Mary will update you on the details. Send him in once he arrives. Luther bowed even deeper, before he promptly stepped outside Lex's office and took his place at the desk. A deep, almost malevolent look flashed in his eyes once he left Lex's office, but he quickly suppressed it. He was nothing more than a common receptionist, and things would remain that way, for now. Mary, send me the list of Ragnar's requests and any information about them, said Lex as he once again sat down on his seat. There are a total of 7 requests he's set, and they have been listed in order. To do the second one, you must first complete the first one. All requests have to be carried out in order, though they don't seem to be connected. According to what Ragnar mentioned, his true request has not yet been written. Only after someone is able to complete all 7 tasks in a satisfactory manner can they be qualified to learn about the real task. Lex nodded and looked through the 7 tasks. To be honest, they were completely beyond his comprehension. Even while reading them, he could not understand what it was Ragnar wanted. For example, the first task was to light a jaded horn lantern in a field of bedravens underneath a sky full of moons blocking out a star. The 5th task was to swim in the ash of Gilder, while the final task was to whisper the name of the deathly precinct under the shade of a divine mango tree. Literally, he had no idea what answer he was supposed to give if the person who came asked him what any of that meant. Well, Lex shrugged. If he was unable to answer, he'd just tell him to ask Ragnar instead. A short while later, Luther opened the door to his office and welcomed in the person who wanted to attempt Ragnar's tasks. What walked in was an 8 feet, 2.4 meters, tall creature in the shape of a centaur. But instead of the lower body of a horse, it was a gray-skinned, 6-legged creature with massive rippling muscles all over its body. Its upper body, still gray in color, was humanoid, but had 4 hands instead of 2, and 6 eyes. The creature had long, straight hair falling down his back and all over his face and a sharp and pointed beard. Curious, Lex scanned it. Name, Dillian Jormander. Age, 6,755. Sex, female. Cultivation details? Too high for host to view. Species, Braven Harbinger. Midnight and Prestige Level, 1. Remarks, the only thing more lethal than a Braven Harbinger with a weapon, is one without. Not to be biased, but Lex would never have been able to guess that Dillion was a female just based on how muscular her figure was. But then, he had never seen anyone from her species before, so he had no point of reference to judge the appearance of a male or female. Whatever the case, it was true that she struck a formidable sight. While Lex was undergoing musings of his own, Dillion had several of her own thoughts going on. She was from the Henali court, and had recently heard about the appearance of a new potential member. Out of curiosity, she came to the inn at the same time as the representatives who left Lex a gift behind. Other than the teleportation, she saw nothing too impressive. Yes, there was a lot of potential here, for example that toddler galactic sovereign turtle, but nothing that struck her as worthy of a new member of the Henali Assembly. Even the dragon was clearly not a member of the inn. The tasks she saw put up on the board in the guild room interested her, if only slightly. It was actually the price that attracted her most. She wanted to use those requests as an excuse to meet the innkeeper, but the moment she stepped into the office, she regretted her earlier arrogance. How could she even begin to suspect a potential member? When had her station been high enough for that kind of judgment? The pressure that each and every brick of this building exuded shook her to her very core, yet the ease with which it transitioned from the hall to the office, which was calm and comfortable, scared her even more. She was wise enough to recognize a silent warning when she encountered one. So the moment she laid eyes on the innkeeper, she expected to have her spirit shook and her soul pressured. Instead, she saw a rather handsome human. His sleek and suave appearance, which would have usually disgusted her, appeared rather pleasing to her eyes. He had a soft smile on his fair face, and his eyes were filled with politeness rather than the usual disdain she witnessed in Dowlords. Suddenly she was startled at her thoughts, and suddenly realized her mistake. Without an ounce of hesitation, Dillion dropped to her knees and lowered her gaze, pleading, "Please excuse my transgression, noble one, my eyes were unworthy to gaze upon you." Her heart was trembling with fear. As someone who worked at the Henali court, it was unimaginable that she would make a mistake as basic of looking towards a lord without permission. Yet she had made it. Now, she could only hope for forgiveness and leniency. "Relax," said Lex, his voice filled with brilliant gentleness. "Here at the Midnight Inn, we treat our guests with great care." Chapter 386 Evil Intentions. Dillion relaxed upon hearing the innkeeper's answer. It was not unheard of for Dowlords to be nonchalant about etiquette, but whether or not they were was their prerogative. Regardless of her status or strength, unless she touched upon the Dow, she had to prostrate herself before them. Now that he had told her to relax, however, she must not emphasize on continuing her display. Another very important rule about dealing with Dowlords was not giving them a reason to repeat themselves. She silently chided herself for ever doubting the veracity of the rumors regarding the innkeeper. If she had not been arrogant enough to request an audience with the innkeeper to further investigate the inn, she would not have ended up in this situation. Upon noticing Dillion instantly obeying his instructions, yet detecting the strong sense of fear and regret radiating from her body, Lex connected many dots and immediately came to a conclusion of his own about what was happening. He chuckled and said, "Sometimes our own extensive experience can be our own detriment. At the inn, so long as you do not break any of the inn's rules, you are completely safe. Now tell me, how can I help you?" Dillion's body trembled, but she managed to keep herself from having any stray thoughts and bowed deeply towards Lex. Only after a minute, when she got up from her deep bow, did she say in a reverent voice, "I am Dillion Jormander, Great Lord, a custodian in the Henali court. I came to seek some clarification on the tasks posted in the guild hall." "In that case, why did you seek me out, and not the person who put down these tasks?" "Great Lord, I feared that checking the details of these tasks was beneath you, and the person who put up these tasks may have been using your platform with insidious intent. That way, should news of the tasks come to light, the one to suffer the fallout would be the inn instead of the original author of these tasks." Strictly speaking, Dillion's words were true, which was the best answer she could give in this circumstance. Naturally, the whole truth was that she doubted the innkeeper's actual strength and status, but the coercion she suffered back in the hall before his office set the record straight. It was not something that could be easily fabricated. "Oh?" Lex said, suddenly pulling up the tasks and looking at them again. To be honest, even with this new information he could not make heads or tails of it, yet he could not allow her to realize as much. The second request was a little strange, to tickle the soul of an aged marble moon fruit. Was that the one that was insidious? Lex, an extremely ticklish man, always felt that the act was the devil's work. Or was it the third request, to steal the death of an ochrot? It literally had the words death and steal in it. Nope, Lex could not make heads or tails of it, so he had to look at the matter from another angle. The tasks were put up by Ragnar, so did Lex judge the man to be one with machinations behind his actions? He had a strong feeling that Ragnar was not such a man, so he would not use the inn to perform any evil tasks. He was a man with a lot of responsibility on his shoulders, so he wouldn't be out here wasting time over nothing. There had to be more to these tasks, but whatever the secret was, Lex was convinced it was not something evil. Also, he really wanted that 1 trillion MP. The tasks have been put up by a repeated guest of the inn, one I have met personally many times, Lex said, his voice as reassuring as the warmth of the winter sun. I trust that there is sufficient reason for him to put up such requests. Dillion did not know much about the innkeeper, mostly because there was not much information about him available. However, his reputation at the inn seemed to be very good, and based on what she heard, he did not seem to have many evil practices. In fact, he seemed to care very little about anything unrelated to the inn itself. So, perhaps, in his eyes, the task that seemed very dangerous, with potentially catastrophic repercussions if not handled carefully, was of no importance whatsoever. She was hesitating about whether or not she should elaborate, or if it would seem rude for her to continue on with a topic the innkeeper already deemed safe. Lex, who was now more in sync with the system and its space than ever before, was naturally able to pick out the expressions on her face. While he was not familiar with her race, his instincts, in this heightened state, were naturally able to detect what was on her mind. Do not be afraid to say what's on your mind. After all, the more you speak, the more I will learn. Naturally, Lex did not say the second part, and only thought about it. The last task, of speaking under the shade of a divine mango tree, especially taking the name of the deathly precinct, if it is not performed with the utmost care, it could end up interfering with the preparations for the Henali Champions tourney. Such a transgression, it is not one that can be easily borne. Dillion dared not look directly at the innkeeper, despite his assurance that it was all right, but she was observing for any reaction that the innkeeper had at this information. After all, even Dowlords had to obey the Henali. But there was none. The innkeeper was as casual as before, as if he did not care at all. Maybe the whole purpose of the task then, he eventually said, his voice as if explaining something simple to a mere child, is to find someone capable of fulfilling the requirement without causing problems. I'm sure he does not mean to attract endless trouble towards himself, but is rather searching for someone brave enough to attempt it, and skilled enough to pull it off. I suggest you do not take the task if you do not consider yourself of sufficient skill. Dillion was startled, and somehow she felt challenged. Though from the innkeeper's voice she heard nothing but genuine concern, calling her courage and skill into question, for her own safety, affected her more than any insult ever could have. She was not crazy enough to try and offend Henali, but, suddenly she was curious about what kind of requirements they have for a person, if just their test alone is already so tough. No, I cannot risk anyone else attempting the task and messing up. I will take this upon myself, she said, both reassuring herself and informing the innkeeper. He smiled at her, his eyes filled with more gentleness than even her own father had shown her, and said, "Then I wish you luck." He truly did, for there was 1 trillion MP on the line here. Once Dillion left, the innkeeper retreated, leaving Luther free to do as he wished. The innkeeper had suggested he cultivate, and had even provided him with an excellent cultivation technique. But Luther's heart could not settle down. He spent several hours familiarizing himself with the inn, then used his position as the innkeeper's receptionist to get a meeting with one of the most famous of the inn's workers, Gerard, the head of security. "It's a pleasure to meet you," Gerard said, as amiable as ever. His appearance had changed drastically due to regalia bloom, making it so that he no longer looked like an aged man, but rather a handsome, mature man. Compared to him, the delicate Luther seemed very lacking, yet Gerard saw a fire in his eyes that let him know not to take this man lightly. "Senior Gerard," Luther began, his voice polite yet professional. "I have been doing some research since my appointment, and, if you do not mind, there are some matters I wish to discuss with you." "Oh? Taking initiative, I like that. Tell me, what do you want to talk about?" "Well, Senior, it has come to my attention that up until very recently, a lot of the security was handled by guards that had been outsourced for the Lady Cosmos competition. But since the competition ended, the guards also returned. During that entire time, and still, many guests took the inn's rules as nothing and kept breaking them, causing the security to have their hands full. Now that the extra guards are gone, your team should be even busier now than ever, correct?" "That is true. I believe, Senior, that the reason people keep trying to break the rules is because of how lenient the innkeeper is. Naturally, someone of his caliber would view all the guests as nothing but children, and so would treat them gently." An evil light shone in Luther's eyes. "But as the representatives of the inn, and the innkeeper, we need to maintain the respect that they deserve. I believe, if we took a stronger stance against rule breakers, the rest would be too afraid to transgress. What do you have in mind?" Chapter 387, Gossip Queen. "What do you have in mind?" Gerard asked, his expression turning a little more serious. In matters regarding security, he took nothing lightly, and this matter, which involved them taking an initiative to propose a change in the way things operate, was especially one that required his full attention. "If I'm being completely candid, then if it were completely up to me, all rule breakers would receive the capital punishment," Luther said, his eyes narrowed. "But no matter what, we must not let the inn's reputation be tarnished. As such, different levels of transgressions must have different levels of punishment. In that case, if we do things my way, the lightest transgression for a first-timer will result in a 1-year ban from entering the inn, while a repeat offender will get permanently banned. We can also suspend any tasks they're performing or requesting in the guild room. Furthermore, depending on how serious the issue is, the punishment can be even more serious. According to what I know, some marauders attacked the inn some time ago, and are still being held at the inn as prisoners." "Yes, that is the case," replied Gerard. "He took care of the prisoners' security and nutritional requirements, which is why he was one of the few people still aware of the prisoners. The rest seemed to have forgotten about them. They were pillagers who attacked the inn. A lot of them were captured instead of just killed. The innkeeper did not feel like executing them, so they have been kept hidden at the inn so far." "Excellent, so following that train of thought, we'll also need to develop a dungeon, or a prison. Guests who break very serious rules can be put in prison or punished otherwise. Of course, for matters related to this, we will have to get the innkeeper's permission, but we should prepare a full-fledged proposal before we present it to him. Moreover, I've noticed that we have many strong cultivators, but most of them are at a low level. We should prepare a thorough recruitment plan and present it before the innkeeper. Some of the guests are genuinely talented and we should utilize them to the best of our abilities. At the same time, I've noticed that we have many workers, and all of them are treated very well, but very few have additional benefits, which has caused everyone to become complacent. I think we should design a promotion system to motivate employees to work harder." The evil gleam in Luther's eyes began to shine even brighter. He had a very calculative and mathematical mind, and the inn, as impeccable as it was full of inefficiencies. Of course, that was not the innkeeper's fault, but a result of the workers, who he found lacking. The innkeeper had trusted him, and Luther would not disappoint him. That, he would make sure of. Lex had dismissed Luther because he wasn't expecting to see any more guests and wanted to explore the inn he had been away from for so long, but it was not meant to be. A number of employees applied to meet with the innkeeper, for they had many things to report. Although Mary had kept him abreast of all matters that required his attention, that was only on the large scale of things. The minor details relating to the inn were many things he had overlooked as a result of his absence. Well, he could not blame anyone, nor was his work getting any less by avoiding it. He began meeting everyone one at a time. The first worker he met was the sovereign galactic turtle, who had requested his presence at the greenhouse. In fact, it should no longer be called the greenhouse, but a farm due to its massive size and formidable output. Fields of vegetables were planted over the sloping hills of the Midnight Inn, with several orchards nearby as well. The formation that was supposed to protect the greenhouse had undergone many upgrades, both in size and function. Since it was only designed to confuse any who entered, and prevent them from delving inside too deeply, the upgrades were not costly. Or at least, not too costly at only 700 million MP. It had resulted in the greenhouse staying safe so far, though now Lex was considering adding fruit picking as an activity for guests to indulge in. A random thought occurred to him, which was that he would probably get some cool upgrades if he got his hands on some kind of farming system. After all, any aid his own system gave him in terms of maintaining the greenhouse was very limited. "How have you been?" Lex asked as he appeared in front of the massive turtle that had buried its shell in the soil. Lex had no idea what it was doing, nor did he want to ask. "There has been a small, teeny-tiny accident," the turtle said, slowly. "Yes, just a small teeny-tiny accident." "Oh dear, why does no one ever listen to me?" "What was the accident?" Lex asked, suddenly becoming serious. It was the first time he heard the turtle lose control of a situation. "Well, a guest paid me a handsome commission to plant a sapling and help it grow up quickly at the inn. Since the conditions for the sapling to grow were too difficult to find normally, I accepted. At first, all was well. Then the sapling grew a consciousness. Then it fused with the delinquent viper vine hidden underneath the inn's soil, and took control of the vines." Lex was extremely alarmed at the news, as the delinquent vines spread as far as the inn extended, and were a very important part of the inn's security system. They were what restrained any troublemakers before guards or security could reach them. If someone hijacked the inn's security, that would be problematic. "Show me," said Lex, gravely. The turtle, after considering for a moment, rolled over. The soil that covered it was ripped from the ground, falling everywhere but leaving a hole in the center where the turtle had been. There, in the ground, was a small, but very familiar plant. "Ijashima?" Lex said, suddenly startled. He remembered the sentient plant well, for it had given him quite the shock back when he saw it the first time during the Midnight Games. But it could not be Ijashima, for he remembered receiving a notification saying that it had died, and its MP balance had been sent to its inheritor. Yet the plant looked too similar for it to be a coincidence. "The name is MacDonald," said the small sapling, young MacDonald. "Hello, young," said Lex, with a hint of amusement when he realized that this plant was actually an employee as well. But unlike the turtle, which had hired itself as an employee, this time the system claimed MacDonald as having been born only due to the unique environment it provided, and so accepted it as a part of the system in the form of an employee. "I have been told that you've taken over the vines underneath the inn. What are your intentions, little sapling?" The few green leaves on the sapling changed color, as if blushing out of embarrassment. "I didn't mean to do it, promise. It just, kind of happened." "Well, I hope you can continue to use them to protect the inn, since you've taken control away from everyone else." "I don't know how," said the sapling, its voice reduced to a squeak. "The turtle will teach you," said Lex, before turning to give the turtle a silent look. This was the first time he had lost control of the situation, and Lex kind of found it amusing. He also did not forget the little scamper had been accepting MP payments privately. It seemed the turtle was entering its mischievous age. "Let me know if there's anything else," said Lex one last time, before teleporting away to his next worker. He really had a lot of ground to cover, and a lot of work to do. But, in a way, this was probably the best way to settle back into the flow of things. He met with a few workers who were planning Harry's wedding and wanted Lex's permission with a few things. He met with workers who had, predictably, gained a bit of weight from eating too much of the inn's extremely organic, extremely nutrient-rich foods, and he met with a few who were just making up fake excuses to be able to meet the prestigious innkeeper. He met with Gerard's old racing crew, who had grown vastly in numbers now. Their fleet of golf carts could be seen all over the inn, some even racing against the midnight train. He met with Little Blue, the flying whale, who had grown a lot more cheerful these past few months, and he met some of the animals who had been living at the inn for so long that they began cultivating. Everything was going well. Then he met with Velma. She approached him pulling behind her several bags, all full of notebooks. She had reports to give, and they were extremely detailed. After all, she was the gossip queen of the inn. Chapter 388 First Binder. "It's been a while," said Lex as looked at Velma, doing his best to avoid looking at the several bags behind her. No matter what, Velma and Gerard held a special place in Lex's heart as the first workers he'd ever hired at the inn. They had been with him through everything, and their help along the way was invaluable. All things considered, it was not strange to say that Lex genuinely missed them dearly. "It has been too long," she said, maintaining the professionalism in her voice, though Lex could clearly hear how emotional she felt. "No need to be so formal between us. We can be considered old friends now." Velma lightly trembled upon hearing the innkeeper's words, and relaxed. Her smile widened as she gestured to the innkeeper to have a seat. She had prepared some snacks and refreshments, for their meeting would not be a short one. "I hope you had fun," Velma said, but then greed gleamed in her eyes as she got to matters she really cared about. "Moreover, if you encountered any touching love stories, I hope you'll share them with me." Lex smiled weakly as he quickly went through his memories to judge if he could recall any love stories. The hedonistic king's harem of wives did not really paint him as a romantic, and everyone else was too focused on killing Craven to have any decent love stories. At most, Dino and his wife could barely count. "I visited a realm under siege by an alien race. I did not get the chance to see any decent romances." "How unfortunate," she said in a saddened tone, though Lex wondered if her sympathy was towards the realm being invaded or the lack of romance. Her morose mood lasted only a moment, though, as she quickly brightened up when she unzipped one of the bags and pulled out her first binder. The inn, on the other hand, was rampant with love stories of all kinds. While I was learning about them, I managed to also learn a bunch of interesting things about various worlds. Take Earth for example. When she opened her binder, Lex was expecting to encounter a scrapbook dedicated to the romances of his home planet, but what he saw instead was an extremely well-documented and completely unraveled list of secrets. Though the planet has come under the rule of Fernanda, beneath her there is a web of political intrigue, all secretly being manipulated by the many political prisoners kept on the planet. From the binder she took out a few pages which had pictures of a few key political leaders on Earth, as well as pictures of the so-called political prisoners on the planet who were manipulating them from behind the scenes. The more Lex heard, the more serious he became. It reached to the point where over 90% of all wars in the last 200 years were caused by the same three prisoners, who all happened to be friends. In fact, Velma even managed to uncover the fact that one of the nascent cultivators from Earth, the one fondly called as Fatty, was just a normal person who reached his current realm due to a random treasure he found. The truth regarding that matter, however, was that one of the prisoners lost a bet, and had to give a treasure from their personal collection to a mortal on Earth as punishment. As if that was not it, one group of prisoners had been influencing the nascent cultivators, and another had been manipulating the so-called rebellion, treating it all as some kind of entertainment. The more Lex heard, the more horrified and amazed he was. He was horrified because of the reach and influence of the prisoners was ridiculous, and amazed at the detail with which Velma had managed to gather information. He did not even have time to process the complexity and intricacy of the conspiracies she was uncovering in front of him, so much so that the next few hours flew by like the wind. But, unfortunately, the few hours did not mean they went through all the binders, no. It took them so long only to cover one binder, which had been labeled Earth. None of the other binders had anything to do with Lex's home planet, which, frankly, once again left Lex astounded at Velma's capabilities. When he asked her how she learned all this, she said this was just her collection of useless information she got while asking various guests about their love lives. Lex's jaw dropped, only mentally of course. In actuality, his expression only changed slightly and showed genuine appreciation for her effort. In the end, though, Lex concluded that he could not listen to her entire briefing today, and instead told her that he would listen to her elaborate on one of her binders each day. Velma found that most satisfactory, as she had assumed that the innkeeper would only take her binders away and read them at his own leisure. By allowing her to tell him about them each day, he not only ensured that they would meet often, he allowed Velma to fully show off her hard work. But he was not done with the binder from Earth, no. He told Velma to create another binder, keeping only information pertaining to all the people secretly causing wars and strife throughout Earth. He would first give the new ruler of Earth, Fernanda, a chance to set things straight. If she could not, he would make all that information public. Once he was done with Velma, countless other workers had requested meetings, including Gerard, so Lex was still not free. Between meetings, though, he still found some time to set down the inheritance lounge and open it, as well as used his new remote presence ability. The remote presence ability let him create a holographic projection of himself anywhere on system grounds. In this case, that included the tavern. This was very important for Lex, for while he was doing the rounds at the inn, some people had arrived at the tavern to deal with him. Namely, Joseph Noel had shown up, followed closely by Mario and Elio Ricci. They had been very discreet in their arrival, ensuring that no one knew they arrived together. Moreover, they had gone directly to a private room, not taking the risk of being spotted together. After all, Mario Ricci was the goat father of Babylon while Joseph was the actual owner of the town. In theory, they should be at odd ends instead of so close. Lex, however, had long surmised that they must have a close relationship. Now that Joseph knew that Lex was in close cooperation with the royal family of Hum Nation, he had dropped his guard, somewhat, and had arrived with the intention of discussing business. Lex did not feel like leaving the inn anytime soon, so the remote projection ability came in handy very quickly. Moreover, with the increase in his cultivation, his mental faculties had improved so much that Lex had no issues controlling the projection while he did work of his own. When Lex's projection entered the private room, Joseph and the rest stood up to greet him respectfully. It appeared as if everyone had been briefed on exactly the kind of behavior they had to display in front of Lex. Lex himself was quite curious, because he had not seen Elio during the town blackout. He wondered if Elio had survived in one of the shelters, or if he had been somewhere else entirely. Lex, I know that you have already met, but let me introduce you again. This is Mario, my on-ground manager for many of my ventures. Mario, said Lex, with a nod in acknowledgement. Lex, said Mario likewise with a nod. In the future, he will be conducting trade on my behalf. Moreover, although it was a little tough, I've managed to arrange 100 energy crystals for you, though they'll be delivered in batches of 10 over the next few weeks. That's excellent. I have the stuff you asked for as well, I'll have someone bring them in. Though, I managed to get a lot of material. The price naturally went over 100 crystals, so you can just choose which ones you want and which ones you don't. Joseph was both surprised and very pleased to hear the news, and became even happier when Rick carried in a chest full of extremely rare treasures. In his heart, he wondered why Lex had trouble locating energy crystals when he could find other treasures so easily, but he did not complain. There was no market for the materials he wanted, simply because they were never available. In comparison, while the energy crystals were extremely expensive, at least they could still be found. Their meeting eventually concluded with both parties very happy. Lex, especially, was very happy since he planned on relying on Joseph to learn about the secrets of the Craven. That's because he asked Mary if another incident like the previous one, where he got trapped in another realm, could happen again. She only replied that until they uncovered the anomaly that resulted in Lex being sent there in the first place, they could take no precautions against it. Chapter 389, Sudden Quest. Lex did not dismiss his projection after he was done with Joseph and Mario. Instead, he went to Aegis, who had been sitting at the tavern, once again conversing with Roland. Lex was slightly curious about what the duo talked about, but not enough to eavesdrop. He only signaled Aegis to meet him in the private room so they could talk. The Crown Prince responded immediately, leaving Roland with only a plate of fries to keep him company for the moment. When he entered the room, Lex did not waste any time and presented him with 2 keys, 1 platinum and 1 gold. Originally, Lex considered not giving Aegis with a key of his own unless he got Zagan to use the platinum one, but he decided not to be so restrictive. Not only would this give Aegis a better impression, but it would also account for the fact that the crystal realm was now linked to the system, and golden doors could spontaneously appear anywhere. Using them, Aegis could accidentally arrive at the inn at any time, so he would rather provide him with a golden key first. If he wanted the platinum key, however, he would need to complete the task. Of course, the chances that Aegis would encounter a golden door were too small, but Lex no longer trusted luck. There was also a considerable drawback to providing him with the golden key, which is that considering his wealthy status, there wasn't much he could go from working at the inn that he couldn't just by himself. This made him consider the fact that he needed to improve his worker benefits. This was yet another thing he would add to his ever-growing list of things to do. This is a golden key, and can take you to the Midnight Inn. You can begin your search for greater opportunities from there as a guest whenever you want. But, if you want to join the Midnight Inn, you have to prove yourself by having Zagan use the platinum key. Carefully, Aegis took the keys from Lex's hand, his expression extremely ominous. He did not think he'd get access to the inn so easily. But, at the same time, he did not even consider reneging on their deal and avoiding Zagan. Whether he joined the inn or not, it would be best not to start their relationship with a bad experience. Feel free to use the golden key once before you try to find Zagan. It'll be good to know what you're fighting for. Aegis caught his breath, as he was severely tempted to do just that even before Lex said so. Now that he had permission. Before he could decide on what to do, Lex dismissed his projection, disappearing from in front of Aegis, scaring the hell out of him. It was not easy to get the drop on an immortal, but Lex kept doing it. As for Lex himself, he was in a meeting with the planning division. They had proposed many changes and alterations to the existing setup of the inn, including Main Street, which was originally where all the main attractions of the inn used to be. Now, with the addition of the party village, a majority of the crowd was attracted there while the Main Street and the rest of the inn became welcome places for the guests who were just visiting. In fact, since the development of the party village, something remarkable happened that Lex had looked over for a very long time. When Earth won the cultural portion of the Midnight Games, they won the award to have their top performers summoned to the inn to perform for free. In fact, they would actually get paid for their performances. But as the inn lacked proper venues to host such events, that aspect of their award was never triggered. Now, finally, various performers from all over Earth found themselves performing live in front of the universe. If nothing else, it had kick-started Earth's economy, as well as cultivation. There were over 100 nascent realm cultivators on the planet now, but almost all of them lived virtually permanently at the inn due to the better environment. Setting all that aside, Lex had been overlooking plans for renovations to Main Street when he saw a proposal for the addition to a very Gothic-looking cathedral. He had long since understood that the workers in the planning division all had unique personalities, and their personalities were often reflected in their work. He had no issue with the Gothic nature of the cathedral at all, but simply wanted to avoid building religious buildings, for he did not want to involve himself in matters of religion. Earth alone was chock full of religions and religious zealots, let alone the rest of the universe. So this was one controversial entity with which he wanted a clear distance. Yet the moment he selected the cathedral to remove it from the proposals, he triggered a hidden quest. Hidden quest: different guests require different environments to survive. Establish 5 unique environmental biomes to cater to different kinds of guests from all over the universe, including divine guests. Quest progress, 3/5 complete. Stable terrestrial biome, low chaos. Aquatic biome. Stable fossorial biome, underground. He had to pause, not only because of the unique way in which the biomes had been decided, but because of the fact that he could almost immediately complete this quest. This was because as soon as he built the cathedral, supposedly, he would gain another biome. It would be a biome that would allow divine beings to exist. Basically, of his existing biomes, on land, in the water, and underground, all counted as unique biomes, but for whatever reason the open air did not count. Or maybe it was a part of the on-land biome. So then, what else would he have to do to get another biome? After all, on top of Midnight Mountain, he had a snowy terrain, yet the change in weather was not counter as another biome. He theorized that the environment was not drastically different enough to count. He would need to run a few experiments to find out. Also, did he have guests who'd been living underground all this time? He had to look into that, for he would have to figure out how to serve them. Chapter 390 Fire Temple. With a bunch of new tasks suddenly on his plate, Lex quickly concluded the meeting with the planning division by approving their changes to Main Street and told them that they would have to reschedule the rest of their meeting. At the same time, Main Street started to change. The road in the middle became wider and the buildings, which had been closely packed together to resemble the urban style of New York, started to gain some distance between themselves. Some of the buildings became taller and wider as well, but in the case of the barbershop, battle axe, and gaming den, they only grew slightly bigger without gaining any floors. Street lights sprouted from the ground, growing like plants and filling in the empty gaps on the road. Benches, small and large, appeared on the edges of the sidewalk, right in view of the greenbelt, which were full of flowers. Statues appeared at intersections, all of the various workers from the inn who had gained some repute. Underneath, the statues were small planks with the names of each worker. As much as the planning division wanted to rearrange Main Street as well, Lex chose not to mess with the original layout. Maybe some of the larger attractions, such as the Avalon building, would be more appropriate on Main Street, but he preferred the smaller shops run by his workers. They were unique and irreplicable, which gave them character, and built the charm of the street. He did, however, allow the addition of the Gothic cathedral onto Main Street, though he kept it near the end. It was a massive building, seemingly carved out of a massive gray rock or mineral. Gargoyles and demons of other kinds stood as statues where even the smallest of space was available, in contrast to the angels and spirits depicted on the stained glass. Internally, the cathedral was one big hall, and instead of rows of pews filling the hall, it was almost bare. The white marble floor was filled with the wildest pattern in gray and black, depicting only utter chaos. Right in the middle of the hall was a marble bowl of pure black color, placed upon a stone pedestal. Around it were 4 large curved sofas, almost forming a circle, though they were spaced out to leave room for entrance from all sides. That was it. There was no center stage for sermons or worship, no idols or pictures of deities. Yet it was filled with a strangely unique aura that was both ominous and resplendent. Lex knew that this was the so-called divine aura, which created an environment uniquely suited to host divine guests. Maybe he would look into it, and in fact, he had a great idea where to get all his information and new cultivation techniques from. When he finally got free, he would go back to X142 and visit the Infinity Emporium once again. His experience there had been good, and he recalled that the person told him that if Lex didn't mind waiting, he could place orders for items that weren't immediately available. Currently, though, it was time to develop the next biome. Lex walked to the lazy river as he thought about what kind of new environment he wanted to build. He dipped his hands in the water and ticked off one of the many things he'd had on his list for a long, long time. He added magic carpet to the inn finally. He'd added many animals from Earth to the inn, but next to none from the other planets. When he saw the big, red beautiful fish, he knew he had to have them at the inn. But the system could not create something out of nothing. He needed to provide the system with some DNA for the animals he wanted to summon. Moreover, they could have no cultivation whatsoever. Moreover, if their bodies were too complicated or had some unique treasures in them, they could not be replicated either. Lex smiled as he felt one of the magic carpet rub against his foot. He was thinking that he had to create a drastically different environment for it to count as a biome. Currently, he was considering two such options. One was a massive lava pool inside a volcano, and the other was an extremely cold cave that reached 100 Celsius. There would, of course, be formations in place to ensure the temperature does not interact with and escape to the rest of the inn. Normally, in circumstances like this, he would have flipped a coin. But since had completely lost all faith in luck, he was forced to make a decision on his own. So, as a compromise, he did something completely different. Lex disappeared and reappeared near the edge of the boundary for the inn, and with a flick of his hand, split the ground open. A ravine hundreds of feet deep, and a mile, 1.6 kilometers, long was formed soundlessly. Spending a nominal 100,000 MP, he put down a formation to ensure the temperatures inside and outside the formation wouldn't interfere with one another, before creating several lava falls from the ground, deep into the ravine, slowly filling it up. He could have filled it up with lava automatically, but he wanted to watch as it happened slowly. He intended to fill the ravine only 3/4, before creating an endless loop. Lava would continuously fall down while the same amount of lava disappeared from the pool down below, causing its level to be constant. Soon the temperature inside the formation began to rise rapidly and, a short while later, he heard the familiar ting of a completed quest. Quest complete. Existing biomes. Stable terrestrial biome, low chaos. Aquatic biome. Stable fossorial biome, underground. Divine biome. Lava pit. The host's reward is being calculated. Reward upgraded for completing quest in less than 1 hour. Reward upgraded for having one extremely unique biome. Reward rank, B+. Reward 1, Fire Temple. Reward 2, New Worker Class unlocked. Chapter 391 Cliffhangers ahead. Lex smiled because he had finally been encountering some easy quests. Before, from quests ranging to recruiting an immortal behemoth to visiting a 5-star planet, and developing a permanent guest district, Lex kept getting quests way beyond his capabilities. Lately though, finally, he had some good ones. He shook his head, denying himself the hope that his luck was getting better, and looked at his rewards. Fire Temple. A building to host divinities with a fiery temperament, though others can visit it as well. It contains all the basic necessary facilities required by a divine being. Must be built in an extremely hot environment. New worker class unlocked, Draconian Apostle. Draconian Apostle. An insecta found in only the most hazardous environments, these extremely versatile, can freely adapt the structure of their bodies to suit their survival needs. A powerful but simple-minded race, their lives are hollow until they find a master to serve, or an ideology to propagate. This was a surprise. Lex always knew he would eventually hire workers that were non-humans, but he always thought he would need to take the initiative in finding them. To be honest, he was so comfortable with humans that he hadn't really felt the need to hire races. In fact, he somewhat believed that his perception as the Innkeeper had strongly been tied to humans or at least humanoid creatures, for even the Henali sent all humanoid representatives to greet him. But before he even got around to it, the system had provided him with a new race, or as it called it, class of workers. He spent 5,000 MP to purchase a Draconian Apostle to see what they looked like, and get a better understanding of them. All he understood, so far, was that they were some kind of insect. Though what he was mentally prepared for, and what appeared in front of him were completely different. A 3-feet-long honeybee appeared in front of him, wearing the signature suit all Midnight Inn employees wore. Its yellow fur made the suit fitting look fluffy and snug, while its 2 massive eyes on the sides of its head made it look like it was in a perpetual state of puppy dog eyes. It made a gentle buzzing sound as it hovered in the air in front of it, but it was actually quite pleasing. "Greetings, Innkeeper," whispered a cute, baby voice in his head. Greetings, replied Lex verbally, testing if the apostle could hear. Introduce yourself and what you're capable of doing. My name is Frederick. I can do most basic physical and spiritual tasks, and have a racial advantage in building stable structures in extremely volatile areas. For my survival, I cannot long stay in such a tempered environment, and am best suited for places with extreme heat, cold, radioactive decay, strong electrical clouds, etc. I can change my shape as needed to suit my environment and task. The cultivation of my species is dependent heavily on the environment in which we live. The more chaotic environment we are able to adapt to, the stronger we will become. Naturally, the environment must also have spiritual energy for us to grow from, but it need not be stable at all. In fact, it is best if it is even a little violent. So a race of masochist bees, Lex mused. Take a look at this ravine, do you think you could survive there? Lex asked as he pointed towards the ever-growing pool of lava. Frederick took the request very seriously, and even flew down into the ravine to properly inspect everything. Due to the draconian apostles being an entirely different race, Lex could not determine its facial expressions, or even detect the to be honest, but his instincts let him know that the was filled with excitement as it flew back. This area is perfect for me, and will greatly boost my cultivation, he said, barely able to suppress its joy. Alright, in that case, whenever we have a guest come to this area, you will be in charge of taking care of their needs, decided Lex as he summoned a few more of them to give Frederick some company. With that done, Lex decided to place the fire temple within the ravine as well. As it turned out, the ravine was just large enough to accommodate the structure of an ancient mosque, with tall spires on 4 of its sides and a pointed domed structure in the middle as the temple itself. Not interested in exposing himself to the heat of the lava, though he'd be protected from it anyway, Lex simply scanned the temple to see what it was like on the inside. Considering it had what all divinities needed, he was expecting to see a few rooms and amenities, but all he saw were several altars in closed-off sections of the temple. Other than that, it was very plain and mostly filled with decorations. Lacking an adequate understanding of divinities, Lex simply shrugged and moved on. He was feeling a little tired from meeting all his workers for the past several hours, so instead Lex decided to catch up on a few other tasks that were waiting for him, the primary of which was the gifts left behind for him by the Henali representatives. There was an epistle with the words Henali embossed right onto it, a small sealed booklet which contained the conventions alongside a small, wooden chest that contained some kind of a gift for him. Such official business was best conducted in his new office, so he retreated back to it and comfortably sat down on his chair. He had asked Mary to try and open them, but she had been unable to open it. There was a very decent chance that Lex himself wouldn't be able to open it either, but he would only find out by trying it out for himself. After a moment's consideration, he reached towards the epistle first, since it was addressed to him directly. Supposedly it was an invitation to the Henali assembly, whatever that was. He did not wait for dramatic effect and tried to open the epistle as soon as he got his hands on it, but, predictably, nothing happened. The epistle did not open. Lex sat back in his chair and frowned as he considered why he was unable to open it. Perhaps since they assumed him to be a Dowlord, he needed the strength of a Dowlord to open it in the first place. Such reasoning would make sense, and if that were the case, these items would remain untouched for a long time, if they were ever touched again at all. While he was thinking, his sight wandered over the other items on the table, and he noticed the letter opener. Could it be? Lex scanned the items on the table, for he hadn't had a chance to earlier. He started with the leather-bound journal, but discovered it was not a journal at all. Midnight in letterhead. An inn, one as prestigious as this, cannot be without proper stationery. The midnight letterhead can be used by the innkeeper to write official letters or messages bound for outside the inn. They will be tinged with the aura of the innkeeper. Innkeeper's pen. Each of the innkeeper's words is worth 100 worlds. Writing anything with this pen will imbue the words with the aura of the innkeeper. Inkwell. The medium to carry power must be powerful as well. No word written with this ink may ever be misconstrued, misunderstood, or manipulated to mean anything other than what the author's intentions entail. Innkeeper's letter opener. A prestigious man must have prestigious friends. An exchange between people of status needs proper etiquette. The letter opened uses the aura of the innkeeper to open letters and packages addressed to the innkeeper to confirm the identity of the recipient. Innkeeper's business cards. Everyone cannot be everywhere all the time. These business cards carry the aura of the innkeeper with them, and when spiritual energy is passed through them, a temporary clone linked to the innkeeper's consciousness can appear. The innkeeper can send it to those with whom he wishes to converse. Lex was genuinely impressed by these items that had remained completely unmentioned so far. They were genuinely so useful for his identity as the innkeeper, but the system had not deigned to mention them at all. Or maybe they were just a part of his new office, which is why the system did not give him individual notifications. The business cards especially were blowing his mind and opened up so many potential options for him to continue to use his innkeeper persona. He had been invited by the Henali to attend some kind of assembly, but Lex honestly had no intention of going. It would only expose him, and maybe even put his system at risk of being detected. But with such clones, he could now consider the option. Chapter 392: Entering the Big Leagues. He would find an opportunity to test the innkeeper's business card on someone inconspicuous and test out its abilities and limitations. For now, however, he had another item he wanted to try. He picked up the letter opener and, without waiting for the dramatic build-up, used it to open the epistle. The wax seal easily came off, and the envelope unfurled on its own, revealing a single page that automatically began to hover in the air. Due to the universal language converter that Lex had received, he was able to pretty much read and write every language he ever encountered, quite easily. In fact, it had been the reason he was able to communicate with the Craven. But when he saw the language written on the epistle, the beautiful purple calligraphy on the page, he knew two things immediately. First, regardless of whether he had the language converter or not, he would be able to understand everything this said. Second, he would have to learn some calligraphy of his own if he ever wanted to write a letter as the innkeeper. Putting away his random thoughts, Lex began to read. Honorable Innkeeper, your presence and activity in the Origin Realm has been noted and acknowledged. The Henali would like to thank you for choosing the Origin Realm to establish your business in, and would like to invite you to the Centurial Henali Assembly to meet and interact with other influential and like-minded individuals. In case you are unfamiliar with the Henali Assembly, it is a gathering that invites all those in the Origin Realm who have touched upon the Tao, under the protection of the Henali, to come together and discuss current events. No affiliation is required to join the assembly, and attendees may keep their identity anonymous. The Henali Assembly is also the only portal through which a Tao Lord can request to join the Henali Court, and other essential, affiliate-restricted events. This epistle also acts as a key to enter the assembly, and can only be activated in the first hour of the assembly. Henali looks forward to your attendance. Time to assembly, 104 hours, 33 minutes, 59 seconds. Lex read and reread the epistle time and time again, analyzing it for as much information as he could get. His heart beat extremely fast as he considered the possibility of going, and all the risks associated. If he had to go in person, he would never ever risk meeting a Tao Lord for one simple reason. It did not take a genius to guess that the Tao Lord realm was even higher than the realm Batet was in, since her cultivation was only titled as Demi-Dao Lord. Moreover, since he now knew that high-leveled cultivators could potentially detect his system, he was more than inclined to avoid them as much as possible. But the business card presented him with a potential solution. Since the innkeeper's aura was being generated through the system, he would not doubt that it could emulate whatever strength people had associated with the innkeeper, and since the event would be under the protection of the Henali, who or whatever they were, he would not have to take the risk of having his consciousness clone attacked or even analyzed in great detail. He was extremely tempted, and his usual greed that was normally hidden once again showed its ugly head. This would be a great opportunity, and he could gain a lot, but at the same time, he was also risking a lot. Moreover, the assembly that happened only once a century was taking place a little over 4 days from now. The timing was extremely unfortunate, for if it had been even a few years away, Lex was confident he would be much better prepared to attend the event. Still, time waits for no man, and he had a decision to make, and only a few days to make it. Lex turned his head towards the other two things left behind by the Henali representatives. The wooden chest was apparently a gift, but the other was a copy of the Henali conventions. Whether he would go or not, reading the conventions would greatly benefit him as they would supplement his understanding of the universe, or at least the origin realm. He picked up the purple tetragonal pyramid-shaped crystal and tried to channel his spirit energy inside of it, but as expected, nothing happened. He then channeled his spirit energy into the crystal through his letter opener, and lo and behold, the crystal cracked, and a stream of energy flowed into Lex's mind. Instead of merging into his memory, a sort of book appeared in his mind which he could open and peruse at any time. Just because the book was in his mind did not mean Lex had all the information memorized, but it did mean that Lex's reading speed would be astronomical. Filled with anticipation, Lex began reading the conventions, and many things finally started making sense. At the same time, Lex finally understood why everyone was so afraid of Henali. In the way that humans, devils, and dragons were races, Henali was actually the name of a race. There was not much of a description of them in this book, as that was not entirely relevant to the conventions. What was mentioned, however, was that this entire massive origin realm, that the humans on Earth used to previously consider the entire universe instead of just one realm of many, was but a single one of the realms that the Henali controlled, and their conventions applied in each and every realm that they owned. Moreover, the reason Dowlords were forbidden from participating in any civilization-related incident in the origin realm was very simple. Much in the same way that the Earth Immortal realm was the peak of the Crystal realm, the Dowlord realm was a level beyond the natural peak of the origin realm. Should they use their strength, they would destabilize the entire realm. After all, as the origin realm was apparently only 19 billion years old, it was not mature enough to naturally support the existence of beings on such a high realm. The more Lex read about the rules, the more goosebumps he kept on getting. In the heart of the origin realm existed a landmass that was impossibly large. It could not be called a planet, for what planet could be so large that it made galaxies look small? Yet despite its size that defied science, at least as Earthlings understood it, the landmass existed in a stable state. It supported life, had rich and diverse climates, was absurdly rich in spiritual energy, so much so that instead of water, it often rained liquid energy, and most of all, did not seem to affect the entire origin realm with its gravity that should have been strong beyond comprehension. Yet it was not just the size of the mass that defied fact and fiction. 6 chains, each consisting of links, each one lather than the entire solar system, protruded from the mass out into space. As if that was not enough, each link on the chains also developed a climate of their own, and gave birth to unique life forms and never-before-seen races. Yet that was mere happenstance. The true purpose of the chains was to act as leashes, and the thing they leashed would startle anyone who even slightly understood the universe. 6 black holes hovered around the mass, sucking everything the universe had to offer, yet at the same time, they seemed to be doing their best to run away from the landmass, as if they had some kind of sentience. Unfortunately for them, the chains that held them in place were not at all threatened by their awesome power. On this landmass, somewhere, was a temple in which a bird, seemingly made out of pure energy, was reading some kind of book. It was engrossed, as if the world itself could not distract it from the secrets of the universe it was indulging in. Yet a powerful bolt of energy struck it, knocking it off its perch and attracting its attention. "Stop reading that perverted crap and get back to work," an ethereal voice thundered. "Another epistle has been opened, and so another Dowlord's presence has been confirmed. Add another chair to the assembly hall, and look into who the new Dowlord could be. Also find out if they're participating in the Henali Champions tourney. The betting pool will open soon, so if there are any new participants, we need to do our research." The bird made of energy only rolled its eyes and, with an exhausted sigh, began obeying the voice's instructions. If a knowledgeable person saw the bird, they would be scared out of their wits, for this bird was exactly one of the few remaining phoenixes in the origin realm, and yet here it was, being treated like a servant. The phoenix, though, did not show any reluctance or hesitation as it began doing its work. Chapter 393 Fugan. Lex spent a good while reading the Henali conventions, and then even longer pondering over what each convention meant, and the reasoning behind it. Beside a brief introduction of the Henali race, as well as the origin realm, right at the beginning, the rest was just a list of rules. Lex had to extrapolate a lot of information from the rules and make a lot of guesses, not to mention that these were the conventions that only applied to entities that touched upon the Tao. There were actually only very few rules for such entities, but Lex estimated that for empires and lower-level people, there would be more rules. The first and foremost rule was that beings that had touched upon the Tao realm were expressly forbidden from directly interfering, meaning using their own abilities in any way, with any civilization in the entire realm, regardless of how strong or weak they were. The second rule was that, should they need to conduct a private battle, they had to stabilize the origin realm around themselves first, by themselves. If any terror is detected in the realm, because of them, they will be heavily fined. Everything seemed fine and dandy so far, as the focus seemed to be on protecting the realm, but the conventions after this were what let Lex know that nothing was ever as simple as it seemed. Any entity that touched upon the Tao, affiliated or unaffiliated, was to immediately report the presence of any so-called Fugan invaders and, in some cases, take direct action to eliminate them. Though there was no explanation for what the Fugan invaders were, upon reading a few more rules, Lex concluded that there was a realm-wide war going on in the origin realm as well. Unlike in the crystal realm, where the origin of the Craven was questionable, and the local leaders even took some actions to ensure they were not defeated too quickly, in the origin realm the Fugan invaders had to dealt with on sight, and had been established as invaders from another realm. Anyone who associates with the Fugan invaders would immediately be identified and treated as an enemy by the Henali, and in the case of Tao Lords they would be expelled from the realm. This rang alarm bells for Lex, for what would he do if a Fugan arrived at the inn as a guest? He did not know what a Fugan was, so there was no reason to believe they would even be interested in being a guest, but that did not change the fact that one could end up being a guest. He needed to understand more about the Fugan and, more importantly, he needed to get his hand on the reward for discovering the anomaly in the crystal realm. The reward was a realm seed, and would allow the inn space to form into its own realm. That way, they would technically no longer be within the origin realm, so even if he had a Fugan as a guest, he did not need to worry about being expelled from the origin realm. This was because when it came to beings powerful enough to own and control multiple realms, he did not think for even a second that they would have a tough time locating the inn, regardless of how easily the system hid it. After all, the system had already shown that it was not perfect at hiding. Lex kept reading, but the many conventions after seemed to slowly start getting extremely abstract, and beyond Lex's understanding. The few more that Lex was able to understand were fairly simple. Mass genocide was disallowed when taking control of a new planet, soul farming was forbidden, bloodline farming was forbidden, and no one was allowed to attempt a breakthrough into the Tao Lord realm within the origin realm. In summary, the origin realm was the private property of some race known as Henali. Though they were owners, their interference within the realm was mostly limited, and the races of the realm were allowed to propagate and spread according to the natural order of things. There were very few crimes they actually policed, such as mass extinction for colonial purposes, and for the most part did not care about who did what. They were in contact with most races or organizations that reached a certain level, and provided protection against these Fugan invaders should their threat cross a certain threshold. Lex finally leaned back and considered his next actions carefully. He only had 4 days to decide. Before that, though, he turned his attention to the wooden chest and swiped it with his letter opener. Much like the other items left behind by the Henali representatives, the treasure chest unfurled itself, revealing some kind of mechanical orb. Lex had only just wondered what the orb was, and was thinking of scanning it, when the system spoke. New notification, upgradable material found. Should the system upgrade for free? Upgrade details, provide the inn access to the Henali portal for free permanently. Using the portal from the inn will keep the location and all other user data hidden unless specifically otherwise stated. The portal cannot be used to track or locate the inn. Lex raised an eyebrow, and then laughed when he understood what happened. He had been given the interstellar equivalent of an internet router. He had heard of the Henali portal before, and had planned on checking it out on his travels, but never got the opportunity, and now, the opportunity had presented itself to him. He did not hesitate and selected the upgrade, causing the mechanical orb in front of him to vanish. Unlike most upgrades to the inn, this one was not instantaneous, which was convenient for Lex, could catch up on his other tasks. As it happened, an entire day had passed, and Velma had appeared again, this time with another binder. Lex rubbed his forehead as he wrapped his head around the fact that an entire day had passed. He had been so busy that he had not noticed the time at all. Still, Lex made time for her since her last briefing had turned out to contain so much valuable information. This binder was on Nibiru, and all the changes that had been happening to the planet. In a unique phenomenon that no one fully understood, the planet had actually increased in size. The sloth known as Golden Hair that was supposedly supposed to look after the planet had once again disappeared, leaving the world to descend into chaos. Since so many beats were undergoing mutations and gaining sudden strength, not everyone was as convinced of their roles, and everyone kept challenging the order of things. The entire planet had descended into chaos more or less after that. There were a few beasts in particular that had gained great fame during this period, one of which was Habval Elyun, a serpent who had proclaimed all the seas of Nibiru as his own territory. There was vehement opposition, but none were able to stop his rapid ascent. Moreover, a large number of humans had revolted after gaining unique bloodlines of their own. Not to mention Tiffany, the girl Lex had met back on that planet, had been spreading cultivation techniques for humans across the globe with her own efforts. In fact, Tiffany was being heralded as the new leader of humans on the planet, and a number of beasts wanted to pursue her, but none were able to capture or kill her. As if that was not enough, there had been official meetings between high-ranking members of the Jotun Empire and several beasts on Nibiru. The Empire had shown extreme interest in reports of mermaids on the planet. Unfortunately, while there seemed to be some proof of their prior existence, no one was able to find a living mermaid. Regardless, the Empire put up several rewards for the location of a mermaid, though they were very careful to also specify that they did not want the mermaid harmed even in the slightest. Just as Lex was pondering over why the Empire valued mermaids so much, Velma elaborated. Apparently, mermaids could transform into humans. Though that wasn't relevant. What was more important was that a child of a human and a mermaid would always be human, but sometimes with the bloodline of the mermaid. The details were unclear even to her, but she was able to gather that the Empire was unbelievably attracted to a certain bloodline ability owned by mermaids, but in all the galaxies that the Empire controlled, they had never been able to locate it. Still, they were determined to get their hands on it one way or another. Lex listened with great interest as he expanded his understanding of the universe, even if it was only one planet at a time for now. Once he was done, Lex took the binder with information on Earth from her and, after a long time, appeared at the inn as Lex Williams. It was time to meet some old friends. Chapter 394, Personal. From the moment Lex decided to use his original identity to when he teleported and walked all the way to where Marlowe's wife, Sophia, was, he had already gotten several notifications from Mary about tasks that needed to be handled by him. It may have seemed like the inn had been functioning fine in his absence, but the truth was they were barely holding things together. It was a ship at voyage having its leaks repaired using duct tape. An undeniable truth, unfortunately, was that the quality and standard of the inn had fallen. It was not Lex's fault, for he had been doing his best to keep up the expansion of the inn as its presence grew in the universe, but he expanded from having a few thousand guests at any given time to a few million in the span of a few months. It was virtually impossible to keep up with the standard, especially because of Lex's cultivation level, which limited the amount of things Lex could do at any given time. An example of the high standard he had early on was the presence of unique places such as the barbershop, gamer's den, and battle axe. They were more than sufficient to cater to a few hundred, possibly even a few thousand people. But with millions of guests, even if they operated at maximum capacity at all times, they still wouldn't be able to keep up with even 1% of the demand. Due to the fact that such shops couldn't be replicated, the uniqueness of the inn fell. Indeed, the meditation, training, hot tub rooms, etc. were good, but they were generic. Lex needed more unique attractions and features to keep up with the demand. Moreover, despite the strict control of the security team and his other employees, more and more people were beginning to misbehave at the inn. This was because while Lex and the rest had given demonstrations, that was a long time ago. Moreover, the people who were visiting for the first time may have not even heard of them. These were exactly the reasons Lex had decided to temporarily not go to other planets and just focus on improving the inn during this next upcoming period. The Henali assembly, in comparison, while still risky, would not take as long, so Lex could still afford to go. Still, while all of these were concerns, Lex was aware of them and already planned on fixing them. Sure, it may take some time, but it would not be a huge loss. This was exactly why Lex could take some time to handle a few personal matters, such as the one regarding Earth. What he did not know, however, was that an army had been silently gathering at the inn for the past few months, completely under the radar. When Lex visited the planet X-142, a mysterious group had begun to infiltrate it. Their purpose was unknown, though their actions suggested that they were either there to destabilize the Dimitri family, or steal from them. The Dimitri family, a business-oriented family that had bought the rights for the X-14 star system for 1,000 years, had picked up on their infiltration quicker than anticipated, and had reacted more strongly than anticipated. Many of the infiltrator teams were captured or killed. But fate is an unusual thing, for it was only a short while earlier that those planets had been connected to the Midnight Inn. The chances of one of those remaining teams encountering either a golden key or the golden gate that appears randomly were minuscule, yet that is exactly what happened. As soon as a single member of the infiltrators figured out the nature of the inn, he spread the word. It was so that this mysterious group, after entering the planet, began using a golden key to teleport to the inn, and remained there until they were themselves required there. Over time, due to the secretive nature in which they were operating, over 5,000 such infiltrators had entered the inn through various strategic points on the planet. When the time was ready, they would return and wreak havoc. Moreover, because they had been at the inn for so long, they had a deep and thorough understanding of the inn itself, and so made no attempts to create trouble. In fact, even while at the inn, they were extremely careful in their behavior. They did not stick together, and instead split up as much as possible. They involved themselves with different events such as the Lady Cosmos and Earth Expo to fit in, and started to acquaint themselves with some of the workers and guests at the inn to seem more authentic. But now, for the first time since they began arriving, some of the group members were holding a secret meeting. Over the next few days, slowly spread the word, said a man wearing the Clark Kent glasses. The operation will begin within 1 week. Everyone needs to be ready at a moment's notice. Yes, sir, was all the reply he got, and it was all he needed. The plan was in motion now. Oblivious to the nefarious plot being hatched with the inn at the center of things, Lex was patiently waiting for Marlowe. The man had rented a large house at the inn, and practically lived here permanently. Considering it was just him, his wife and his son, spending money on a 2,000 MP a night house was a little extravagant in Lex's opinion, but then again, who was he to complain? Lex was genuinely impressed by the fact that Sophia did not seem to be bothered by his request to meet Marlowe and directly called for him. After all, as a popular man, there must be many wishing to meet him, yet he was still so receptive. The truth was that due to Marlowe's newfound strength and complete disregard for social norms, most people feared even coming in front of him, let alone meet him, so this was genuinely an uncommon occurrence. When Lex finally saw him, he noticed that the former giant had finally started to regain some of the muscle on his body that made him seem more of a monster than a man. Yet currently the amount of muscle he had stacked up was still within the realm that mere mortals could understand. Well, 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 look who has the guts to show up at my house after dropping my class, said Marlowe wearing his signature mad grin. Unfortunately for him, now that his body proportions were actually normal, he looked handsome instead of crazy with that smile. Lex simply shrugged and said, "Your wife had my apartment ransacked. I didn't want to get pulled into your family drama." Marlowe, who had been fully intending on messing with Lex, froze. He had no idea about the details and turned to look towards his wife, who was just filing her nails nonchalantly. She couldn't even be bothered to deny it. "Well then, lad, I'd say you did the best possible move to defend yourself by running far away," Marlowe said with an approving nod. He sat down opposite Lex and made himself comfortable. His old butler from back in his apartment in New York appeared from a different room and began laying down snacks and refreshments. "As much as I'd like to sit here and reminisce about the good old days, I'm here on some serious business." Lex put the binder on the table in front of Marlowe and said, "You can treat this as a request, or a favor. Or maybe if there's something you need, I can help you get it done, but I need your help to get this binder in the hands of the woman named Fernanda." Marlowe raised an eyebrow in curiosity. He recalled Lex clearly because he had been ordered by his step-family to keep close tabs on him nearly a year ago. In fact, it was through Lex that Marlowe first learned of the Midnight Inn and gained his opportunity to improve his life. He not only had a good impression of him, but he was also quite intrigued by him. There was clearly more than met the eye about him, so now that he directly referenced Fernanda so straightforwardly, without making any roundabout excuse of why he even knew that name, he was even more intrigued by what was in the binder. Without saying anything, Marlowe picked up the binder and began perusing. At first, he was nonchalant about it, but only a few minutes later his wide grin dropped and he became utterly serious. The story about a hidden hand manipulating all the conflicts on Earth would have been too far-fetched for Marlowe to believe just a year ago, but now he doubted nothing. A few moments later, a tinge of red entered his eyes as he read about a certain conflict, to be precise, the one in which he had to sacrifice his golden core, and lost a majority of his comrades. That too had been a part of a worldwide chess game between the prisoners being held on Earth. If before he had only been intrigued in hearing what Lex was saying, now he was suddenly greatly invested. After all, it had just become personal. Chapter 395 Professional Gossiper. "Is this all real?" Marlowe asked the question that seemed obvious. "Yes," said Lex, his expression extremely serious. "Moreover, their backgrounds out in the universe are not simple at all, otherwise they would not be kept prisoner like this on a planet like Earth that has lacking spirit energy. Other than constricting their cultivation, they're essentially free, which is probably where the oversight occurred, allowing these people to treat Earth as they wished." "Heh," Marlowe said with a half-smirk, looking at Lex with amusement in his eyes. "Are you explaining that to prevent me from taking any action myself? You know, lad, I've been alive for a minute or two. I've lost good friends, and I've lost the opportunity to kill long-standing enemies. Regardless of whoever they may be out in the universe, here on Earth they'll be my B** cheese." Lex shrugged and said, "As long as these people stop creating problems for Earth it's good enough for me. But at least if you give it to Fernanda it'll be a good way of gauging her reaction. I'm not used to Earth suddenly having an owner, but if it has one it's best to at least understand them first." Marlowe did not immediately answer as his mind churned, going over the pros and cons of various decisions. Regardless of much time he spent at the inn, it was an essential truth that his foundation was based out of Earth. To stay at the inn, he needed to pay, and his source of income was indubitably linked to the planet. Moreover, after the recent Earth Expo, Earth's economy was undergoing a boom. Everything was progressing at a rapid pace, and a new space race had already begun to reach the other planets in the solar system. Others, instead, were planning for mining operations out in space, with the ultimate goal of building massive satellites and space stations around the planet. In fact, based on the history of Earth and humanity, many expected that the rich and powerful would have all their attention focused on their own personal growth, and the weak and helpless would once again be forgotten, except when it was time to shun them. But a mysterious organization by the name of Rose Society had appeared overnight with seemingly unlimited resources and reach, and changed the world forever. Rehabilitation centers, homes, schools, colleges, trade schools, farms, and more were suddenly provided by them, and they began attracting all those that could not help themselves. In a mere 3 weeks, a very large portion of homelessness disappeared, for all those willing to move had been relocated, provided with excellent living conditions considering they had not asked for anything in return, and were already training them to re-enter society, under the care of the society, of course. No one knew who was behind the society, regardless of how much they tried to dig up the details, and no one understood what the society's purpose was in doing this. No one, at least no one with significant power, believed such a large organization was truly altruistic. Regardless, all of that was irrelevant in the face of those whose very purpose it was to create chaos. If those prisoners were not handled, all the progress Earth was making would only become a setup for a larger conflict later. Despite himself, Marlowe ended up asking, "What do you plan on doing if you find Fernanda's reaction lacking?" Lex shrugged and said, "What can I even do in that case? Maybe I could kill those prisoners myself, but that would not solve the problem, which is that Earth is under the ownership of a callous leader. Maybe, in that case, it would be time to consider changing who has control over the situation. I've heard good things about this Jotun Empire, maybe we could invite them to visit the planet." Marlowe did not comment on Lex's plan, and simply stated that he would deliver the binder to Fernanda. Without the copious amounts of pain he felt at every moment distracting him, Marlowe was actually a very disciplined and sensible man. Unfortunately, years of being crazy under the influence of his pain had made it somewhat of a habit, and the wide grin on his face after Lex left indicated that he was about to do something crazy again. Lex, on the other hand, had already stopped thinking about the matter. It wasn't as if he didn't care about his home planet, but rather that he had too many other tasks to deal with. But also, on some level, when he left his home behind and moved into the inn, a part of him started treating the inn like his home, and Earth as just another planet the inn was linked to. As for his family back on Earth, Lex shook his head. For a while now, he had done his best to avoid thinking about them. In fact, it was precisely after he removed his tumor that he subconsciously started avoiding thinking about them at all. It was not very difficult, for he was swamped. There was one task, especially, that he had been thinking about for a long time. He had been searching for some race or some unique guest who had an innate advantage in this field, while completely ignoring those already available and with sufficient skill for the role. He was thinking specifically of his quest to start a news service he got back in Chapter 162, of the quest he got back when Earth was undergoing civil war and he was desperate for news about how things were going. He had been thinking that he needed to find someone with an innate skill or ability to collect information. Now that he thought about it, if he ever encountered someone with a newspaper system, he would be perfect for the role, but there was no point in completely putting off that task until he ran into someone like that, especially when he had someone as skilled as Velma. Her ability to gather information had genuinely surprised him, and it went far beyond the scope of general information available to the public. She was sifting through information so hidden even the upper echelon of Earth itself had been unaware, not to mention what she told him about Nibiru. Considering these were only 2 binders, he couldn't even imagine what the hundreds of other binders contained. She was more than qualified, he just had to now give her the tools required to do the job well. Lex teleported back to his office, which he was growing incredibly fond of, and summoned Velma back. She showed up excited, with another binder in her hand, but before she could begin, Lex started speaking. "Velma, I am genuinely impressed by your ability to collect information and have re-evaluated your role at the inn. You've been placed in upper management because of how long I've known you, and your deep understanding of the inn, but I see now that this is not where your skills are best put to use. For a while, I've been interested in starting a news agency, and I think you'd be perfect to run it. What do you think? I'll give you full control of how you want to run it, and monitor your performance. Then, as your operations finally begin, I can continuously give you feedback on how you can improve." Yes, she blurted out, filled with immense excitement, while in her mind she could only think of one thing: the gossip column. "Excellent," said Lex with a smile and, after a ridiculously long time, finally completed the quest by designating Velma as the head of the news service. Quest complete. Reward: Midnight News Building. Without hesitation, he put the Midnight News building on Main Street, once again contributing to the most unique street at the inn. He teleported himself and Velma over to inspect the new building and check out all of its features. It was a long, rectangular building with only the ground, first and second floors. The ground floor was a public area, with dozens of counters where guests could come in to purchase specific news. Lex went through the functions of the building in his head, and began sharing them with Velma. The most common feature of the building was its ability to publish newspapers instantly, and have them appear throughout the inn instantly. On the first floor, there was a records room as well, where a single copy of every newspaper ever published would be recorded for posterity. Other than that, the building had an interview room, where any lie told by the interviewee would immediately but discreetly alert the interviewer. As much as Lex was hoping, the building lacked any function to detect huge scoops, and searching for and retrieving news would completely be up to the journalists hired at the building. There was, however, one feature that greatly excited Velma, though Lex did not exactly see the charm. It was the advice column. Chapter 396, Boulder Shrine. While Lex had told Velma that he would let her run the news service as she wished, he still inquired about what her plans were and what kind of help she needed. Despite the short duration of Velma's designation, she had already come up with an extensive plan for what she wanted to do. While it was a news service, it was based out of the Midnight Inn, so whatever news they published would be based around the inn. In fact, she was not planning on doing a full newspaper, anyway. Velma had planned on releasing a single-page newsletter once a day detailing events and incidents, as well as stories featuring prominent guests and inn workers. There would, naturally, be a special events section that would mention if anything significant was happening on any worlds related to the inn. That, naturally, did not mean that she would not collect information about other worlds, just that if anyone wanted something more specific, they would need to come to the Midnight News building and purchase whatever they had available. Obviously, Velma was not omnipotent, so it would not be possible for her to always know everything. But the more time she spent doing this, the better she would become. Besides, all the information she had on the binders could directly be added into the agency repository. But at that point, Lex realized that if all the news was spread equally, it could cause problems. After all, some information was sensitive. In this case, he told her to divide information into two categories, and the more sensitive information was reserved only for employees, such as himself or potentially others who would be interested in it. Of course, even they would have to pay, though they would get a discount. But naturally, collecting news casually and actively collecting news was different, so Velma would need help. But, contrary to what Lex expected, she did not ask for any new employees. Instead, she said she would only require the help of Anita, the pregnant lich that had become an employee. Lex didn't ask in too much detail how she planned on collecting news and information, she was clearly an expert. He did, instead, ask about what she intended for the advice column, since she seemed a little too excited for that. The advice column, as the name suggested, would be a column in the newsletter where guests at the inn could ask for advice regarding any problem they were having, and Velma vehemently hoped they were romantic problems, and she would answer under the column heading called Ask Rachel. Anyone could submit questions through their personal holograms, and then Velma would filter through them and answer as she liked. It seemed very ordinary to Lex, but then again, he had a lifetime of experiences behind him while Velma was on the verge of turning 1-year-old. Speaking of which, for a long time now, Lex had a little something planned for the inns as well as Velma's and Gerard's first birthday, and he could finally start working on it. Feeling quite pleased with the enthusiasm Velma was showing for her new position, Lex disappeared from the news building. He was on a roll for crossing things that had long been waiting to be done off his to-do list, so naturally he wanted to keep that state going. The next thing he did was retrieve a small pebble from the Midnight Tavern. This was no ordinary pebble, for it produced water that drastically raised Lex's strength. He was planning on submitting it into the gift shop for a moment so he could read the system's description of it, but something unexpected happened the moment he retrieved it. He got a system notification regarding the tiny rock. New notification: a unique treasure worthy of being in an attraction has been discovered. Generating a new room to maximize use of treasure. Unique treasure, dead core of a divine boulder. Remarks, in an era older than most can remember, even the mundane was worshipped. But in this era, even something as grand as the inn has no worshippers. Such a useless era. New room unlocked. New room, boulder shrine. Boulder shrine, a shrine that collects divine energy and channels it into the dead core, causing it to produce the divine essence of a boulder in abundance. Those who are not immediately poisoned to death by the divine boulder essence gain many of its divine attributes. At first, Lex was extremely impressed at what he was reading, but when he read the part about immediately being poisoned to death, he trembled. He had taken a huge risk by absorbing that water, or divine essence, as he now knew it was called. But then again, Lex was being guided by his instincts into absorbing it, so on some level, his body clearly knew it was good for him. "Mary, is there any way to prevent this poisoning?" he asked, as he tried to look deeper into the building's specifications. "Maybe if you upgrade it further, but at the moment, there are none. Moreover, there's no guarantee that the recovery pod will even be able to heal such a poisoning, as the only way to be really sure is to find someone suffering from it and scan them." "Is this really something we can add to the inn then?" Lex asked with concern. He knew for a fact that the system judged him negatively if a guest who had not violated any rules died at the inn. Since this is a building provided by the inn in the first place, there should be no problem. We'll just have to make sure that everyone who tries to use it is aware of the risks first, and that the inn takes no responsibility should an accident occur. Still hesitant, Lex slipped into what he needed to upgrade the room. After all, he was a rich man now, so he could surely afford to directly upgrade the boulder shrine a few times. Unfortunately, that was not how the room worked. To upgrade unique rooms such as this, Lex not only needed to pay an MP, he needed to provide some unique materials as well. In the case of this room, he needed to provide material that was compatible with the dead divine boulder core, and he had no idea where he could go looking for it. He thought for a moment, but then decided to add the shrine. He would make sure anyone who took it was adequately warned. Also, he wanted to see if the divine essence produced by the shrine could continue to help him improve his body. He placed the shrine right next to the inheritance lounge and teleported in before anyone else had a chance. Instead of a room, the shrine consisted of 4 pillars placed in such a way that they were forming a square, connected only by leafy vines that went from the peak of each pillar to the next, drooping in the middle. The vines formed a natural curtain with only one entrance, allowing anyone to enter. In the middle of the shrine was a small bird bath, in the middle of which lay the dead core of a divine. The difference now, though, was that while the rock barely produced any moisture previously, even after a while, the pebble-sized core was already producing essence now. It was not fast enough to quickly fill up the bird bath, but it was much faster than before. Without hesitation, Lex dipped his finger in again to check if anything happened, yet it was not to be. It seemed that this level of divine essence was no longer useful to him. Next up, he had to think of a price for this. It was not hard if he did things normally, but while Lex was thinking of what he could offer to Aegis, he realized there were truly too few incentives to be an employee when he could gain everything as a guest. So now, the prices of things, especially unique opportunities, would no longer be simple. To use the divine essence, a guest would have to pay 10,000 MP for 10 milliliters, but at the same time, the guest also had to be at prestige level 3 minimum. This was a kind of division he could have always had, but he never bothered to do so. Now, however, he was going to put it to use. After all, the more exclusive an item was, the more its value increased. In fact, he even changed the qualification of using the inheritance lounge, keeping the price at 100,000 MP per attempt, but setting the requirements as minimum level 4 prestige. Of course, employees did not need to care about prestige and could use all facilities directly so long as they paid. This may seem like the difference created was not huge, but it was. It would just take time for it to become evident. After all, the first few levels of prestige could be unlocked with money, but not the later ones. Chapter 397, Second Seed. The inn's prestige system had been unlocked for quite a while, but it remained mostly unused beyond the first level. Even then, it was mostly because the first level was free and anyone who arrived at the inn would automatically get it. The only benefit Prestige 1 availed was the use of special glasses, with the Clark Kent effect. Anyone could put them on and hide their appearance and energy signature perfectly, allowing them to come to the inn in perfect disguise. This was a feature all guests had, and was probably the most used feature that the inn offered. Then came Prestige 2. A guest had to spend 10,000 MP to unlock this level, a feat that was originally very difficult when the Prestige system was unlocked, mostly due to the fact that there was nowhere to spend the money. Now though, renting a small village for a single night costs 15,000 MP, which would put you well within the prestige limit. But the only benefit this level offered was to be able to instantly teleport to the inn once a year without the use of a golden key or door. There were genuinely a few circumstances in which this feature may seem useful, for example if you ran out of keys or for example were in the middle of an intense fight and needed a sudden getaway. But outside of those very special circumstances, the feature seemed very lacking. After this came Prestige 3. Though the feature this level unlocked was also time-sensitive, it was definitely more attractive. This level would allow the user to directly travel to a planet connected to the inn once every 10 years. Considering that interstellar travel could take hundreds of years, especially while traveling between galaxies, the appeal of this feature was considerable. It was somewhat unfortunate that the reach of the inn was limited so far, but over time this would become an extremely sought-after feature. But despite its attraction, it was just one feature. Considering a guest had to spend 100,000 MP to unlock this level, it was both cheap and expensive. For anyone who needed to travel large distances in the origin realm, it was dirt cheap. But for everyone else, it was too expensive. Moreover, traveling to another world would pose considerable risk if one were not strong enough, so why would they leave the comfort and familiarity of their home planet? Such features, that were limited in their use cases, made it so the privilege level was an almost forgotten feature of the inn. But now Lex intended on increasing its uses and setting certain features as only available at certain prestige levels. Not only would this be an incentive for guests to spend more MP, it could increase the attractiveness of becoming an employee, as they would not need privilege to use any facility or feature. After all, while the first 3 levels were simple to achieve, from Prestige 4 onwards, there were more and more restrictions. The 4th Prestige level itself, other than requiring guests to spend 10 million MP, required the guest to be minimum at the nascent level cultivation, and have spent at least 1 month renting a room at the inn. The requirements may seem simple, but they became progressively more difficult as the level went higher. At the same time, the level of difficulty matched the subsequent perks. For example, Prestige 4, which would allow guests to have a 5% discount on all inn services, would also allow guests to use any inn facility once while outside the inn once every 10 years. This meant that they could use anything from the facility of the meditation room, recovery pod, hot tub room, etc., from anywhere in the universe. As Lex added more and more services, the number of facilities they could use would continue to expand. For example, now anyone who reached Prestige 4 could directly retrieve some information from the news building without having to come to the inn and then approach the building for specific information. Speaking of which, Lex suddenly had an idea and sent it towards Velma. Instead of dividing news into 2 categories, one available for public and one only for the inn staff, she could create various levels of sensitivity and make certain information available only if the guest was at a certain prestige level. Yes, once Lex started thinking like this, more and more ideas started coming to him. He recalled that the sovereign galactic turtle had charged someone for growing a plant. He had been so occupied with hiding the greenhouse, he forgot it could be used as a service. He still would not let guests into his greenhouse, but he created a small portion of it available to the public in the forest that surrounded the greenhouse. He then decided to create a service which would allow guests to submit rare or difficult plants to grow, and the inn would grow it for them. Or, they could also sell it directly to the inn. Lex was interested in collecting rare plants as he wanted to develop his collection. Who knew when he would encounter something useful? According to the difficulty, the payment and prestige level would be raised. Lex assigned the duty to the turtle, but since he was doubtful about how serious the turtle would take this job, had Mary keep an eye on him. After assigning the tasks, Lex already moved on to other tasks. Had he continued to pay attention, he would have realized that the turtle was nowhere near the greenhouse as usual. Instead, he was standing over the ravine which contained the fire temple. Its eyes contained a fanatic glow as it lowered vines into the lava pool. Strangely, the vines were not incinerated by the heat, though, of course, they never directly came in contact with the lava. Near the peak of where the lava reached until, the vines drilled into the ravine walls and disappeared. A short while later, black-crusted mushrooms began to grow, feeding off not only the heat, but the divine radiance of the temple. After watching its experiments succeed, the turtle carefully took out another seed. This seed was one of 3 Lex had given him. The first one had bloomed on its own after the underwent an increase in star levels, and became the world seed lotus that now resided on Lex's back. He lowered the seed, this time even more carefully, and planted it in the ravine, as close as possible to the lava without actually touching it. At first nothing happened, but a short while later, the aura of the fire temple fluctuated as a majority of it was sucked away. But just as quickly as it vanished, it returned, for the system's control over the inn was insurmountable, and it quickly adapted for the aura being absorbed. A short while later, a single charred stem grew from the ravine wall, pointed towards the temple. Its growth stopped, as if it was satisfied with simply being exposed to the temple's aura, but the turtle grumbled. Clearly, this was not the result it wanted. Back at Lex's office, he had to temporarily stop his growth at the prestige level, for something else important attracted his attention. Marlowe had delivered the binder to Fernanda. The reason Lex knew this was because he had slipped one of his business cards inside it. Not only was this a good way for Lex to experiment on how useful his business cards were, this allowed him to know how Fernanda would react to this information. This was a loophole Lex discovered in the system's design. Originally he would not be aware of anything related to the card until someone channeled spirit energy into it, activating his consciousness clone. But when he sat in his office chair, his connection to the system and the inn was deepened completely. This included, among other things, any business cards he had given out, since they were also generated by the system. Returning to Fernanda, the strange thing was that Marlowe handed the binder to a projection of Fernanda on Earth, but once the projection disappeared, the binder disappeared with her. But Lex knew that the binder reappeared on a space station somewhere where her real body was. Lex raised an eyebrow. That was cool, he had to admit. He was watching silently and intently as she read the binder, though he could not detect any changes in her expression. Either she was used to maintaining a cold expression, or she already knew all the information she was reading. All Lex could really do was observe the environment around the card, otherwise he would have started considering whether or not to activate the card. He really needed to see what a consciousness card felt like, but there was no way he could prompt her to find it and channel her energy into it. After a few minutes, she closed the binder without finding the card and went away. Lex did not know if she planned on doing anything, but he would keep an eye out for any changes on Earth. If she did nothing, well, even if the innkeeper did nothing, Lex Williams was also now a force to be reckoned with. Chapter 398 A Matter of Laws. Lex waited an entire day, but Fernanda did not return, so there was no opportunity for her to find the business card. Time was running short, and he had to test out its capabilities, but it seemed like he would have to do it himself. He could, naturally, just find a random person on any planet and have them activate the card, but he had a better idea. Time was tight, so he did not sit around and teleported out of the inn, reappearing in a familiar environment. He looked around to ensure he was alone before he turned in a particular direction and used Home Sweet Home, blasting off in a straight line. Home Sweet Home was a technique Lex used, which was ridiculously fast in a straight line, so much so that if an ordinary person were to use it they would need to wear glasses just to keep their eyes open against the wind pressure. But now that Lex's cultivation had reached the peak of the Foundation realm, his speed had reached a whole new realm. In fact, Lex's speed at the moment had somewhat crossed the threshold of what normal Foundation realm experts could achieve. Of course, this was because of the unique nature of the technique as well. Otherwise, without the use of any techniques, the only aspect of his body that transcended his realm was his toughness. In fact, from the moment Lex achieved his latest boost in cultivation, the way he perceived the world changed dramatically. The human body had an inherent gauge for danger, and certain things would naturally make you hesitate. For example, an ordinary person would not approach a high ledge with a cavalier attitude or would be very careful when touching a blade. The care or hesitation hidden behind those actions was rooted in the body's perception of the possibility of harm and its instinct to avoid it. To a large extent, all such instincts had basically vanished from Lex's day-to-day life. The only danger he perceived, if at all, was from extremely strong individuals. He felt nothing when he looked down from high places, most sharp edges felt as dull as a boulder. He was pretty sure that even the oh-so-intimidating guns from back on Earth would not scare him much. In fact, if he did not feel the need to perfect his foundation through his actions, he would have broken through to the Golden Core realm. At that point, his defense would have been even stronger. A side effect of his increased defense was a sense of security that made him more comfortable taking risks, which is exactly what he was doing now. He was currently in X-142, and he was returning to the Infinity Emporium. He ran until he reached a small town, where he used some of the massive supply of spirit stones he had in his home at the inn to straight out buy a hovercar from someone. It took him quite a few hours, even at the fastest speed, to reach the Emporium, but it was completely worth it. Even the last time he came here, Lex ended up buying quite a few valuable things. In fact, it was at this moment he recalled he had an amulet or something that hid identity from cameras or something like that. He had no idea where he put it, to be honest, and had forgotten it even existed right up until this moment. It seemed even cultivation could not prevent you from losing your own things. He stepped into the familiar building, once again amazed at the fact that dozens of people entered before him, yet once inside, he arrived completely alone. The only other person in the shop was the familiar Powell Grant, standing behind the counter with a familiar smile. For a moment, Lex could not help but wonder if the Emporium was a part of a system or something. How else could so many people enter, yet detect no difference as they all get teleported to an individual room? It certainly did tick the box for systems by manipulating space, but honestly that was not enough to confirm his suspicion. After all, just because it was impressive did not mean it could not be achieved through other means. "Dear customer, it's good to see you again," said the shopkeeper with a smile. He seemed to recognize Lex as if it was yesterday, and rightly he should. Lex sold him some premium information, the likes of which were not easily encountered. "It's good to be back," Lex said, as he glanced at the items on display. "Just in case you returned, I had our catalog updated," the shopkeeper said, bringing out a book from beneath the counter. "Last time we could not provide you with truly impressive items due to the kind of sales we have on this planet normally, but now I have arranged for a premium selection that can be made available in as little as a day upon order. After all, since your last transaction boosted you to a level 8 membership status, we have to make an effort to cater to your needs. I recall during your last purchase you were interested in items with spatial properties. All such items are level 7, and usually too valuable to keep on a planet with a level 4 rating like this, but I managed to stash one here in case you ever come back." The shopkeeper was filled with pride as he elaborated on his preparations, though Lex doubted the man expected to encounter such an amazing deal yet again. Regardless of what he thought, Lex was about to clean out his so-called premium stock. The talk about level also gave him similar vibes as to how his system worked, as it divided guests into prestige levels instead of membership levels. But once again, this was too arbitrary a comparison to make a judgment, yet. "I'm glad you've made preparations this time," said Lex, his smile very sly. "Because this time I'm in search of very particular items, and I already know how I intend to pay. The burden is on you now to perform." The shopkeeper listened with excitement. It seemed like Lex was his lucky customer. "I have a card here, a business card." It belongs to a mysteriously strong person suspected to be in the downlord realm. If anyone channels their spirit energy into it, a temporary clone of that person will be summoned that one can interact with. The person in question is known to not be very hostile or aggressive, so summoning the clone should not earn you any ire. But the drawback is, the card will only remain active for the next 24 hours. The shopkeeper was momentarily startled. The time limit of the card greatly reduced the value of the card, yet the inherent value of such a card was monumental. When he recovered, a massive grin painted his face as he opened the latch on the counter and welcomed Lex to the back. The item had to go through appraisal, before any further discussions. Lex had spent the last few months in the crystal realm, and a lot had happened to him during that time. In fact, it was not just himself who underwent a massive change, but his system as well. But the level of his change, while massive compared to his starting line, was not enough to get him in touch with the higher levels of the universe, directly at least. While he was in the crystal realm, due to the natural boundary of the realms, his changes were detected by none, for there were none in that realm looking out for the kind of changes he underwent. Once he left the crystal realm, he went directly to the Midnight Inn, which had a destiny-level protective formation, preventing the influence of karma, destiny, scrying, prophecy, and so on. Thus, once again, for better or for worse, his changes lay undetected. The moment he landed on X-142, however, his aura resonated with the laws of the origin realm, and like a ripple, the resonance carried out into the vast unknown. Due to the ridiculously size of the origin realm, one would expect that it would take a long time for the ripple to travel throughout the realm, yet this was a matter of laws. In a unit of time so infinitesimal, Lex could not possibly perceive it. Like a trumpet announcing the arrival of a lord, news of Lex's changes were declared in the very fabric of the realm. What this meant was too complicated to explain simply. The repercussions of this, however, while few, were significant. On a planet far away, Serene Williams was sighing as she thought of her rebellious daughter. It would be so much easier if she rebelled by bringing home a boyfriend or something, but no, she had to go participate in an intergalactic war for honor and pride and a few other equally worthless things. Before her thoughts could go deeper, though, a tremor ran through the entire planet, splintering it instantly and causing many continents to instantly collapse. In fact, had it not been for several formations that sprang to life immediately stabilizing the place, the splinter would have run directly through the planet, destroying its core and causing an explosion that would have changed this from a planet to a bunch of meteors. "What happened?" she asked, instantly appearing beside her husband, her eyes extremely grave. Only he could have done this, but it didn't make sense. His training was going well, he should not have lost control of his strength like that. "The mark I left on Lex's skull has vanished. He is either dead, or someone has removed the mark." Horror filled her eyes as she visibly paled, but her husband spared no time to reassure her. Things had to be done quickly. Chapter 399 Emporium Treasure List Number 1. The cracked planet slowly started to heal itself under the influence of various formations, but that did not mean all was well on the surface. Billions of creatures had already died due to the sudden cataclysm, while hundreds of millions more were affected by the drastic change in climate. But fortunately, the formations that were healing the planet were treating the planet holistically, so the creatures that managed to survive the first few dangerous instants had a very large chance of surviving. To Serene Williams and her husband, however, that did not matter at all. To begin with, this planet was a training ground for Alexa's father. After all, since he restarted cultivation from the very beginning, he would have to have a host of proper enemies to face and arduous tasks to complete. Thus, this planet, which was originally in its early stage of developing life, had been artificially populated with the most dangerous predators in the universe. In fact, there were even several beasts with impure dragon bloodlines, and one very real dragon, all kept as prisoners on this planet as the man's grinding tools. Well, technically, the dragon was no longer a resident of the planet, for it had been killed long ago. After all, they could not afford to let it go free after imprisoning it for so long. Individualistic though they may be, dragons had immense pride, and if it ever got out that a dragon was kept as a prisoner for a human's training, let alone the Williams family, the entire human race may not be able to face the repercussions. Again, none of that was a concern for both of Lex's parents at the moment. The news shared by Lex's father was the worst possible outcome. Neither of them considered the fact that anything dangerous could happen to Lex, for they had gotten a prophet to see into the future and predict the direction of Lex's life. He predicted that so long as Lex stayed away from cultivation, and stayed away from the influence of the cultivation world at large, he would live a relatively safe life for 50 years. Based on that information, they had made their own timeline to increase the pace of their cultivation and accomplish a few things. About a year ago, when they learned that Lex had begun cultivation, they feared the worst and increased the pace of things. When they began hearing news of the presence of the Midnight on Earth, they feared the day Lex might himself get involved in such matters. Now it seemed like that time had come. Get someone on Earth to locate Lex, if they can. But do it discreetly. My gut tells me he's gotten himself involved with something dangerous, and I don't want to attract any attention. What about you? Serene asked, her voice laced with concern. You still haven't mastered Neelam's /. The man, Lex's father, frowned for a moment, before it seemed like he made a hard decision. Standing there, the man's aura changed, and if Lex saw him now, after getting over the fact that the pot-bellied old man now had sick abs, he would recognize that he had entered the state of flow. A second later, he transcended the flow state and went into the overdrive state Lex had recently unlocked. Then, he went beyond even that, and soon it seemed as if the world itself began to bend according to his will. Ultimately, for the briefest of moments, he reached an even higher level that almost brought him to the threshold of causing a ripple in the fabric of the origin realm, much in the way Lex just had. The moment did not last, however, because the very instant he achieved it, the man drew his practice sword and slashed forth. Something seemed to click, and the single slash he had been trying to master for years became so simple, it became more inherent to him than breathing. His form, his strength, his swing, his intention were all perfect. There was no sound of the sword cutting through the air, because it was not thin air through which the sword swung, but the fabric of space itself. A straight, neat cut through space appeared before the couple, before some mysterious force seemed to stretch the cut open, revealing what looked like a ballroom. A tall, rather handsome man stood in the hall, a glass of wine in his right hand and a book in his left. He looked up to see the couple and raised an eyebrow. This, he was not expecting. Father, said Lex's old man, as he stepped through the cut space, as if he was simply walking through the door. Serene followed closely behind him lest space began to heal itself, separating them. I was just thinking about you, my rebellious child, the handsome man said, his voice just slightly forbidding. Would someone like to explain to me why I suddenly have a 23-year-old grandson suddenly appearing in the family tree? Instead of replying, Lex's father responded with another question, his voice reeking with the desire to murder. Would someone like to explain to me why my daughter is going off to war? The handsome man was startled by his son's tone until he noticed he had overlooked something incredibly obvious. His son, meaning Lex's father, had entered the family grounds holding a sword. Crap. Powell Grant was grinning so widely it almost hurt his cheeks. Almost. Not only had he verified the veracity of the card, the instant he entered the card in the business's database, someone bought it with a price so amazing Powell was looking towards a bonus several times the size of what he got for the information regarding the Bangle of Narn. Mr. Lex, no I mean, Sir Lex, I think you will be greatly pleased with the price we're offering for your card. Of course, if you have anything you need, feel free to mention it, and I personally guarantee that as long as it exists on the market I will get it for you. Why don't you tell me what you're offering first, said Lex, feeling pretty good. One would think he would get sick of earning money after all the MP he had, but not really. It always felt amazing. Sir Lex, I would first like to tell you that your membership rank has been raised to level 9, the highest possible rank one can achieve without meeting the owner of the Emporium himself. What that means is that the list of items available to you none is even larger, though if you select a rank 9 item it will directly be traded for the card. If that is your wish, I can arrange it for you, but I had already created a carefully selected list of items I suspected you might like based on our previous experience together. First, as requested, I have created a list of spatial items that I can easily arrange for you within the next 10 hours, as well as their sizes. Next, the rarest and most sought-after seeds in the galaxy, as well as the most optimal fertilizer for plants of various grades. After that, I recall you had a unique interest in preventing your identity from being exposed, so I managed to get my hands on a unique bangle that prevents long-distance tracking via prophecy, so long as the other person doesn't have some of your blood. Then I noticed that you were using a very old version of one of the Emporium's best-seller items, the fancy monocle, so I procured the latest version for you, the AR contact lenses. The man continued elaborating on his list, but Lex was momentarily startled when he heard what he had said. The fancy monocle was actually a product of the Emporium? Lex always thought that it was something his own system had created. If it wasn't, did that mean that all items he got from the system were actually stolen goods from across the universe? Or was his earlier guess correct, and the Emporium was actually a part of another system, and that systems could somehow trade items internally or something? Without any outward change, Lex focused on Powell and tried to use one of his new features that allowed him to scan people even outside the inn. Name, Powell Grant. Age? Sex? Cultivation details? Species, unknown. Midnight and prestige level, 0, never been to the inn. Remarks, if you want to sell your soul, he can get you a good price. Species unknown? Wasn't he human? Before Lex could continue to ponder such important questions, the shopkeeper showed him a list of items available to buy with his new and increased rank. On the top of the list was an item that Lex could not believe he was seeing. Emporium Treasures List. Number 1, History Wiper. In case of an untimely demise, this valuable treasure will be sure to erase any and all evidence of any actions you may want to keep hidden. A must-have for adventurers, entrepreneurs, Casanovas, and those with questionable browsing history on the Henali portal. Chapter 400 Marzu. After buying the History Wiper, for no reason in particular, Lex quickly went through the list. The things the shopkeeper had arranged for him were tempting, but he wanted to get a look at some of the really valuable items as well. Unfortunately, as monumentally rare and impressive as they were, the truly high-tier items had no way of helping him as they aided in the cultivation or requirements of very high-level cultivators. Either way, it did not matter much to Lex. His next focus was going to be on finishing the foundation and beginning his journey on the Golden Core realm. As such, he would now start getting items that would help the and better nurture Golden Core cultivators, as well as himself personally. The first thing he got was a spatial bangle that would allow Lex to store items within it. For example, if he had a chest full of gold in front of him, he could teleport it directly to the space within his bangle, without being burdened by its weight or having everyone see him moving it. Quenhild used to have such a treasure, and it made Lex supremely jealous, though he was pretty sure that the one he had now was far superior to hers. After all, it contained a space the size of 5,000 cubic meters. After that, despite how odd it felt, he got himself the upgraded version of the fancy monocle. For better or for worse, he had to know if they truly were the same, or were at least the same kind of technology. Then, naturally, he bought the other bangle that would help him hide his identity. After that, he bought a couple other level 7 items that would ultimately aid his own cultivation, and his guests as well, of course. One particularly interesting item he bought was a spirit stone vein seed. It was an item that would absorb chaotic energy from the universe and create spiritual energy in the form of spirit stones. Of course, the level of energy produced wasn't too high, and could barely suffice for nascent level cultivators, otherwise such an incredible money-making machine would never be up for sale. Then he bought an entire repository of techniques. His real purpose was to get various spirit techniques for himself, but there was no reason he shouldn't populate the inn's library at the same time. The size of the repository Lex requested was so large, in fact, that even the Emporium couldn't deliver all the books at once. After all, the amount of books that could be fit into the payment for the business card were beyond count. Furthermore, ensuring that techniques were not repeated made it even harder. Even Powell was troubled by the sheer volume of this request, and ultimately had to promise Lex regular payments every month instead of delivering all techniques to him at once. That little maneuver made Lex a little proud, as he more or less solved his technique problem for the near future. There was, however, one more thing Lex bought, something he had been on the lookout for many months. He bought information on the Craven race. He was very pleased to see that the Emporium actually had information on Craven, until he started reading, that is. Instead of a detailed report on their race, their culture, their strengths and weaknesses, the information was only a summary of their history in the Origin realm. Much like they were behaving in the Crystal realm, the Craven were a warring race. They waged continuous war throughout several galaxies and were responsible for the extinction of many races. Perhaps this trend would have continued, but in their mad desire for conquest they attacked another extremely strong and extremely vindictive race called Marzu. After being attacked once, the Marzu wiped the Craven from the Origin realm. The matter for how they were wiped out remained a mystery to this day, because the race had not been encountered ever again in the Origin realm, even in newly encountered galaxies. This was a huge deal, since there was a pattern of races reappearing throughout the realm. Even planets completely separated from the rest of the realm, several races reappeared, as if they had evolved as an original race of that planet specifically. It was in the way that humans kept reappearing on various planets throughout the realm. Yet according to the information, the Craven had never been encountered again after that incident. Unable to help himself, Lex looked up information on the Marzu as well. When he read about them, he was startled to learn that he had already encountered this apparently ridiculously strong race. In fact, they had once been natives of Earth as well. The only thing was that now, on Earth, this race had gone extinct. Moreover, after studying their fossils, the name humans had given them was Tyrannosaurus rex. Apparently, their innate advantage in cultivation was so immense that they controlled over 100 galaxies in the realm. That was several times the size of the Jotun Empire. Since he failed to learn anything useful about the Craven, he collected information on the Marzu and returned to the inn. There were only 2.5 days left until the assembly now, and he was getting impatient to try out his business card. Fortunately, he did not have to wait for too long. On a massive space station, a teleportation formation powered on, revealing a square block of metal. A mechanical arm picked up the block and put it on a conveyor belt, transporting the block across the station to what looked like the command center. A gray-skinned being that had its body merged with various machines weakly opened its yellow eyes and looked at the metal block. Though it appeared to do nothing, the metal block was sliced open, revealing a thin paper card buried in the middle. The card looked extremely ordinary in the spaceship, surrounded by exceptionally advanced technology, yet the being knew its worth was immeasurably greater. With a pained expression, it channeled some of its spirit energy into the card, activating it. Once energy was channeled into the card, it gained a life of its own and began absorbing energy from the environment on its own. Lex, who was sitting in his office, felt a brief but sharp pinch in his mind before he suddenly realized that he felt like he had another brain. Though still linked with his main body, somewhere out in the universe another version of himself appeared, completely able to think and behave on his own without even slightly affecting the brainpower or awareness of the Lex who sat in the inn. A few moments later, that brain also developed a complete but ethereal body. Lex looked around and found himself in an extremely dark room. He immediately noticed that in front of him seemed to be some kind of face buried completely in an avalanche of tubes and machines that seemed to keep it alive. Lex did not immediately address the being, for he was busy investigating the features of his new clone. He seemed completely unable to move, and he could vaguely detect how long his clone could survive. He felt he could shorten or elongate the existence of his clone, but there was a limit to how long it could exist. At the same time, his clone seemed completely able to use all the system's features. "Oh, Your Excellency, please excuse me for summoning you without your permission. I am desperate for any kind of hope, and am willing to pay any kind of price I can." It was not the being that spoke, at least not on its own. The sound came from various speakers throughout the spaceship, as if the being had merged with the ship itself. Lex did not respond immediately, and instead observed the being. His physical body was not present, obviously, but his instincts were still active. The being before him was much stronger than himself, yet it seemed unable to gauge his strength. If the clone hid his strength, that would be most convenient. "What kind of hope are you searching for?" he finally asked. "Your Excellency, I am on the verge of death, yet my mission remains incomplete. My cultivation has regressed so far that I have no hope of breaking through, while my technology is no longer able to support my body. If you can allow me to live a while longer, you would have my eternal gratitude." Lex raised an eyebrow, for this request really was too convenient to fulfill. After all, he had just received an upgrade to allow just such a thing. "Would you choose to continue living, if it was only as a spirit?" The being closed its eyes, as if it had been asked the most painful question it had ever heard, and yet it was one he needed to answer.